In September of 2005, just 1 year after the release of Sly-2 Band of Thieves, Sucker Punch released Sly-3 Honor Among Thieves, the final entry in their PS2 trilogy, and a title that was intended to be the endpoint for the series. For many fans, Honor Among Thieves didn't live up to the standards set by its predecessor, as it struggled to push the series forward mechanically while being unable to recapture the same narrative quality. In recent years, though, I've noticed a resurgence within the community defending Sly-3. Perhaps this is a result of the collected community sigh towards Thieves in Time, but regardless, those folks are justified in the rebuilding of Sly-3's reputation. It has a lot of great moments, missions, and memories. It just also comes with a lot of needless bloat and unnecessary changes. In this video, I will be exploring how Sly-3 simultaneously failed to live up to the accomplishments of its forerunner, but also how it managed to carve its own path and leave fans of the series with a satisfying finale. Before we get to all that though, it's important to once again go over the logistics for this video. First things first, I'd recommend watching my 2.5-hour analysis of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, as well as my nearly 4-hour critique of Sly-2 Band of Thieves. I will be referencing points I made in those videos throughout this one, and having that preliminary information will help in consuming this video. I do understand though that asking you to consume 6.5 hours of content before watching this video is a tall task, and so don't feel pressured into it. If you played Sly-3, you can follow along with this video just fine. Next, as with the previous 2 videos in this series, I know this one's going to be a doozy in terms of length, and so I've once again left timestamps in the description below that you can use to jump to different parts of the video. This piece of media has been structured in a similar manner to the previous 2. I'll be going through the entire game, chapter by chapter, mission by mission, and examining every component of the game, from its presentation, to its gameplay, to its narrative. I'll break up discussions on categories like graphics, music, combat, new gameplay additions, minigames, story beats, and etc. throughout this video and try to put them where they fit best. Hopefully, this style has made the previous videos, as well as this one, a treat to watch. Also, I am a mega fan of the series, so there may be some bias even if I do my best to put it to the side. Finally, the last thing to mention before we get started is that I am once again recording footage on my PS4 Pro using the PlayStation Now service, which isn't the greatest for capturing purposes. Random borders get created and cut off, and the game does experience some slowdown from playing this way. All I can do is apologize up front for this if it appears in the footage. But with all that being said, let's move on to the meat of this video. Just as I did with the previous 2 entries in this series, I'd like to share 3 overall thoughts that guided the following analysis. 1 on gameplay, 1 on narrative, and 1 on presentation. First up, Honor Among Thieves opted to push the series gameplay laterally instead of forward by throwing a lot of new mechanics and characters at the wall and seeing what stuck, and spoilers, it wasn't many. And much of the original platforming gameplay is now diluted to make room for the new content. Second, the game's narrative shifted away from being plot-driven and instead emphasized the characters, by putting Sly, Bentley, and Murray into situations that tested their fortitude, while also challenging their dynamic as a team and forcing them to confront the past to determine how their futures would unfold. And lastly, Sly-3's presentation remains as strong as it was in Band of Thieves in some areas, but it does actually take some steps backward in others. But it's somewhat understandable considering this game released just 1 year after the previous title. So these three thoughts shape my critique, but I'd like to share one more before we get into this video proper. I've done my best to sit my biases as a fan of the series to the side and see these games for what they are and on an individual level, and nowhere has that been more relevant to my thoughts than here in Sly-tly. For years, I tried to fit Sly-tly into the mold that Sly-2 used because of their similar gameplay structure, but consequentially, I ended up liking the sequel less because it couldn't compare to Band of Thieves narratively. This time though, I've been able to see Sly-tly in a new light, standing on its own, and so without further ado, I present my critique/commentary on Sly-tly, Honor Among Thieves. Honor Among Thieves dishes out content in the same manner as the previous two entries, in episodic format, but there's of course a tutorial included first to get the ball rolling. Sly-3's tutorial is the best the series has to offer, as it quickly teaches players the three primary mechanics, jumping, hitting, and performing super stealth moves, while also providing a great deal of spectacle. It begins with Sly making his approach onto a tropical island where he quickly dispatches some enemies using stealth. For newcomers, it demonstrates his skill set, as well as the kind of character Sly is: silent, confident, and deadly. In good taste, we take control of the character by first sharing a conversation with Bentley, and it's clear something big is about to go down. We have been placed in the midst of a grand operation, something akin to how each chapter of Sly-2 ended, and it feels awesome, given those were some of the best parts of the previous entry. For returning players, it provides that familiar feeling that only Sly games can deliver. The player's expectations are soon subverted though, as Bentley does a roll call, asking other members of the gang to sound off. Observant players may recognize a few of the silhouettes, but some are complete newcomers who we will get to know throughout the game. For the first time in the gang's history, the Cooper gang has expanded, but the player is left with very little time to process this. The show must go on. We take control of Sly and casually platform through a set path as each new member assists us in taking out obstacles along the way while never revealing their identities. From a tutorial perspective, the player is forced to jump up onto a truck, break some wooden barricades blocking a path, and use some iconic jump and hit the circle button moves in order to reach the next area. Sly-2's tutorial only made 2 out of these 3 core mechanics necessary to be used to complete it, and it's good to see that minor issue was addressed in Sly-3. It seems like a small thing, but every game should do everything it can to teach the player basic button prompts as soon as possible. We soon reach an underground lab where a new character makes himself known. Meet Dr. M. We don't know much about his background at this point, but what we do know is that he is vicious and intolerant of laziness. I'm gonna let this scene play out because I think it does a great job of characterizing Dr. M without going overboard.
How's your wife doing, Richards?
Oh, very well, Dr. M. Thank you for asking. Very thoughtful.
And your son, what's his name, Mike?
Mark, sir. He's well too, yeah?
Shame you won't be seeing them again.
Sir?
Afraid I poisoned your drink at lunch. Sorry, Richards, but I don't tolerate poor performance. You should have changed the security code from 123 after you installed the new system.
I'll improve, I swear.
No, you'll die any second now.
Oh.
Yes? Water leaking into the lab? I'm on my way down. Oh, and get a janitor for the lab elevator. Richards got sloppy.
That's right, he kills off one of his men for a simple mistake, and this makes his paranoia and villainy immediately obvious to the player. We continue onward and reach the Cooper family vault, evident by its cane indentation. Sly goes to unlock the vault, but is caught off guard by Dr. M on some sort of flying device. Dr. M calls out, "Cooper!" No, you're Sly, Cooper, which hints at Dr. M's true origin and how he came to learn about the Cooper Vault. It's a little detail that is missable, but will foreshadow his true motivation for focused players. Bentley shows up, and surprise, he's in a wheelchair. But again, there's no time to think about it. The duo must escape Dr. M's clutches and regroup with the others to cook up a new plan of attack. As they just about reach their destination, Dr. M shows up and he's plugged into a massive dinosaur orc thing that's hell-bent on crushing us to smithereens. It's epic and it's intriguing because it's not immediately obvious what this creature is, where it came from, or how it's being controlled. The enraged monkey demands the cane after endangering Bentley, and Sly must take a few whacks at him before realizing it's futile. He launches his cane upwards, and the monster throws it into the ocean before snatching up Sly, triggering a cutscene. Sly recounts the months leading up to this moment, detailing his backstory for newcomers while setting up the main motivation for the events of this title. So, interestingly enough, they actually made a comic book that showed the events that transpired between Sly 2 and Sly 3, but I never owned it, so I can't comment on it too much. What we get here is enough to bridge the gap between the games, but just barely if I'm being honest. For example, we're told about a man named McSweeney who worked with Sly's dad, and he tells our raccoon hero about the Cooper family vault, and that's about it. McSweeney is a character fans will want to know more about, but in order to do so, they'll have to get the comic. Anyway, the point is, Sly reaches the island where the vault is housed, only to discover Dr. M's forces, and he realizes that in order to pull this job off, he's going to need a team of master thieves. And just like that, the journey we're about to go on is established, assembling an army of world-class thieves in order to get access to the vault and see what lies inside. The tutorial is very well done, but it's at this point where the player realizes that the story will be told in flashbacks, and that's the only sour note I can mention about this opening section. The easiest way to kill tension is to leave it unresolved for an extended period of time, and that's what happens here as Sly's life is left in the balance for the next 7 to 8 hours as the player, plays the game. By the time you get back to this scene, it feels like an, oh yeah, I forgot about this kind of moment. But with that, we wrap up the tutorial for Honor Among Thieves. Psych! Sly 3's tutorial level taught us the basics and set up the story so nicely, and that makes what comes next all the worse. It turns out, Sucker Punch kinda thought we were all a bunch of morons, incapable of understanding the basic controls after 2 whole games, and so they included the hazard room. Every time you start a new save file, you'll have to go through at least a few challenges in this hazard room before you're allowed to start episode 1, and it's ridiculous. There's 3 challenges at the start, but more unlock as you progress through the story, but luckily the rest are optional. However, I subjected myself to all of the optional ones for the sake of being thorough, or maybe just for your viewing pleasure if you enjoy knowing that I wasted precious minutes of my life on the hazard room. After completing them all, let me share some thoughts on this tutorial room. Let's start with the setup of these. Bentley brings you into the hazard room to shake off the rust and get your form back so that you can work in the field with ease. You're asked to do basic things like move the camera around, double jump, take photos, learn how to pickpocket, and eventually learn how to control Bentley and Murray as well. You get a series of mini tasks to complete in a low stakes setting before you get sent out into the field. Sly 2 handled this so much better. It just weaved new abilities and mechanics into the main story, and while Honor Among Thieves does that with its new features, it elects to force players through this uninspired and boring set of lessons. And the worst part is, most of this information is redundant. The mandatory lessons teach you how to move the camera, how to ping a waypoint, how to jump, how to double jump, how to ninja spire jump, and crawl through tight spaces. The story tutorial already taught players how to jump, double jump, and move the camera, as well as have the player perform super stealth moves. So much of this becomes redundant and a waste of the player's time. Also, the writing is just super cheesy in this section, and I'm not a fan of it. Oh, and a quick note on presentation here. I don't like the chapter select screen in this game. It's just too basic. You just cycle through a list while random images with no meaning pop up on the top of the screen. Sly 2's chapter select was so much more detailed, and this one feels flat compared to it. Okay, back to business. The first team member we need is a familiar friend, the Murray. After the events of Sly 2, when Bentley had his legs broken and the gang was left in disarray, Murray suffered from a breakdown of sorts and blamed himself for Bentley's injury. He couldn't look past this and decided to leave the team, leaving Sly and Bentley on their own for a while. I love the continuity between the games. The ending of the previous title had a real, genuine impact on our Band of Thieves, and the opening of this game is about bringing them back together. It helps these two games flow more smoothly together in the same way that Clockwork's presence did at the end of the first game into the beginning of the second. We're also introduced to Don Octavio, a mafia leader in Venice who pretty much runs this section of the city. Sly hopes that getting Murray back onto the team won't require them to confront the Don, but of course we know it will. Unlike in Sly 2, the villains of this game are not linked. They're one-offs, and this comes with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. It forgoes the overarching narrative that the previous game utilized so wonderfully, but opens up a new path, mainly one where our characters can be explored more. Don Octavio is one of my favorite Sly villains, and An Opera of Fear is my personal favorite episode in Sly 3. Police HQ is our first official job in Honor Among Thieves, and it's about gathering information on Murray's whereabouts so that we can arrange for him to rejoin the team. We platform up to the police HQ, and it's here where I realized that the random lag spikes that were present in Sly 2 would also be here in Sly 3. I don't think this is the game's fault, just my connection to the PS Now server, but I'm mentioning it again here so that if you see it, you know it's not really the game's fault. Anyway, we make it into the HQ and find an old friend. They could not resist bringing back Dimitri, the ultimate lounge lizard. And who could blame him? He was one of the best characters from Sly 2, and so it makes sense to bring him back here as a nod to the fans. The game wastes no time thrusting a new mechanic right into our face, and it's the first of many new additions that either hit or miss the mark to various degrees. At a few points throughout the game, we're brought to these dialogue options where the player must select the correct option in order to advance. Here, Sly needs to get information out of Dimitri and can threaten violence, cut a deal, or use flattery. The correct path is to cut a deal with him and then select the option to distract the guards. The wrong options prove to be not much more than filler, as they don't carry any real consequence for choosing them, rightfully so since there's no way for the player to know. At least you can breeze through it on a subsequent run if you remember the answers. All in all, it's one of the weaker of the new inclusions, but it's harmless and at least some of the dialogue is entertaining. We then make a play for a key to open Dimitri's cell. It's here where we meet Carmelita for the first time in this game. After she was resigned to the bench in Band of Thieves, her role in this title is more pronounced. Well, about as much as it can be for a character on the other side of the law. She's giving a presentation about Don Octavio and is instructing her mercenaries on their attack strategy. I love that you can listen in for extra information, but that you can also skip it in following runs. Anyway, you get the key and get back to Dimitri, where we get another new mechanic, lockpicking. It's fairly rudimentary. You twist the left analog stick one direction until you feel a vibration, and then you go the opposite way. Rinse and repeat until the lock opens. You're supposed to take it slow, but I've played this game so many times that I just do it rather quickly, and it's kinda easy to cheese. It's not a very hands-on mechanic, and it's not going to require a lot from the player, but at least it lends credence to the thiefy vibes and makes sense contextually. It's then time to keep up our end of the bargain. We free Dimitri and distract the guards after he tells us Murray's location. Outside, Sly and Carmelita have a quick interaction. She's once again refocused after his escape at the end of Sly 2. Both of the previous games have ended with hints of romance between the two, but now it seems that the policewoman is all business. Sly makes his escape and encounters Murray, and the two are able to spend time catching up. I love the exchange between the two old friends, although I wish we were given a little bit more time to feel the Murray's absence. Still, we'll get some of that over the remainder of this chapter. With that, we conclude our first job of Sly 3. Before jumping into the next job, I wanted to briefly go over the level design of Sly 3. The setup is nearly identical to that in Band of Thieves, and so I won't be going into too much detail. Essentially, we get these mini hub worlds that house the missions. They're all designed to feel like a jungle gym where the player can mess around using Sly's superior maneuverability. Just like in Band of Thieves, they're designed to maximize Sly's capabilities while also compromising to a degree so that moving around them as Bentley and Murray doesn't feel like a slog. The levels are easy to navigate with any character, it's just that traversal becomes more fluid while playing as Sly, as it should be given his athleticism. In this way, the player feels Sly's skill set and can understand him better as a character and a person because of it. The only new addition to the level design is the inclusion of traps, which can be triggered to insta-kill any guard. In the first stage here, you'll find water pits to drown enemies, as well as boats that can be dropped on their heads. These don't really add much to the experience and serve mostly as a novelty. The first time you kill a guard with one, it might get a chuckle out of you, but after that, it gets rather stale. Sly is a character designed to be on the move, and having him standing around waiting by these traps just feels kinda off for his character. As we will come to see, Sucker Punch included a lot of these small little mechanics throughout the game, and while some of them aid the thiefy vibe, most of them probably should have been scrapped to come up with bigger ideas. Again, this game came out only a year after the first, so maybe the development cycle didn't allot much time for a major change. In terms of level design, the only thing that I feel has dramatically improved in Sly 3 is the backgrounds of each area. They've been expanded on and improved to make it feel like every world isn't just a tiny island floating in the middle of nowhere. In particular here, Venice has buildings in the background that convey the idea that this city spans on in all different directions and we're just in one pocket of it. So back to the mission now, the task at hand is to snap some pictures of Octavio to prove that he is the one behind Venice's tar problems. During the introduction to this mission, we learn that someone is polluting Venice's beautiful waterways with tar, and it's of course the mobster Lion. In Sly 2, we use the Binoculcom a lot for reconnaissance work, and I'm glad it returned here in the sequel. We don't use it quite as often, but it still proves to be a handy way to gather intelligence to build a plan around. Following Octavio around town gives new players a chance to learn the map's layout, and snapping pictures at the opportune time proves to be kinda difficult in some cases. The first one is a cinch, but after that the player has to accommodate for tough angles to get the rest of the snapshots. For the last two pictures, you have to hop on a boat and quickly get the shot. I actually got a few job failed screens throughout this mission, but the game is pretty generous about it. If you get the picture, you won't have to get it again, even if he spots you afterwards, which is nice considering after each picture, the Don looks to his right, and when you're on the boat, you can't really control your location, so if you get caught, it's not really your fault. The mission concludes with Sly eavesdropping on Octavio's conversation with a man named Giovanni. The mission ends with a bang, as our duo confirm that Octavio is behind it all, and in order to get Murray back, they'll have to stop him. Into the Depths is a great mission for players who are new to the series, because you get a little bit of platforming and a little bit of combat. Levels like this is where the series got its start, but the number of them in each game has diluted with each subsequent entry. Sly-tly has jammed in so many new playable characters and mechanics that these old-fashioned platforming and combat challenges are rather few and far between. Sly and Bentley must weave their way down into the depths of Octavio's opera house and hack into a computer terminal in order to get access to his plans. You play as Sly and alternate between doing super sneaky stealth moves and beating up guards. It's all divided up nicely and well paced so that the player is alternating between these activities frequently. The player is able to overhear a conversation between the Don and his guards, and it's good to have multiple opportunities to be up and close with the villains. It's a trend that started in Sly 2, and I'm glad that it's carried over into this title, because the player gets to learn more about their foes and their motivations, making them better characters. The mission culminates with having to protect Bentley as he hacks into a computer. Guards will enter the room one at a time, and the player has to kill them. The easiest way to do this is to simply knock them into the nearby fire. This is probably asking too much, and probably wouldn't have had the intended effect, but I would have loved to see them flood the room with 2 to 3 guards at a time and have the player kinda get overwhelmed more. This would highlight Murray's absence from the team given his role as the muscle. This is especially true if you played the previous game where Sly and Murray teamed up often to take out guards. Still, Into the Depths is a solid introductory level that eases new players into playing as Sly while also being a fun mission for series veterans. Our next job is a short-lived one. Bentley and Sly team up to protect Carmelita from the Blue Viper Gondola gang who is attempting to make her sleep with the fishes. In order to do this, Bentley hotwires a police boat and uses its mounted turret to shoot down the Vipers. As we will come to see, Sly-tly loves including vehicle sections, some of which are better than others. In this one, you'll race down the canals of Venice taking out the gang while avoiding obstacles. The boat controls pretty well, and there's an overcharge mechanic so that you can't spam shots forever. It's a basic setup, but it leads to some frantic and fun gameplay, so I can't really complain. It changes up the pace at the very least. The mission ends pretty quickly, but it's a nice way to take advantage of having a level set in Venice. It's like a natural fit to the setting. Narratively, this job also reminds the player of the romance dynamic between Sly and Carmelita. Bentley posits that by saving Carmelita, that they're only making their job here harder, and Sly retorts with saying that it's just not any fun without her chasing them. Bentley puts it bluntly by saying that the real reason is that Sly has a crush on her. This will they, won't they dynamic has existed for a few games now, and this game finally resolves that tension with its ending. And it's so good to plant the seeds for it early for newcomers and also to remind returning players. Turf War introduces the player to the most sweeping change between Sly 2 and Sly 3. The introduction of new playable characters that are outsiders or newcomers to the Cooper clan. In Sly 1, the player could only play directly as Sly, but that was expanded on in the second game when Murray and Bentley became playable. It feels like a natural fit for the series, and was a smart way of introducing variety within the mission structure given the different skill set of each of the 3 characters. In my opinion though, Sucker Punch fell in love with this idea too much, and they went overboard with it in Sly 3 by having 4 new playable characters along with the 3 we already had. I'll talk about each during some of their specific missions, but as a whole, I don't love them. They take away from the characters we've grown to love, and at the same time, the game never commits fully to utilizing them, as you can't roam freely around the worlds with them. The new inclusions are locked to specific missions. By the end of the game, it feels like a case of not enough missions with too many mouths to feed. So let's rein it back a bit and now look at Turf War. For the first time in the series, Carmelita Fox becomes playable in the hub worlds. Sly and Bentley devise a bait and switch technique to get the esteemed policewoman to take out a gang of Octavio's men who have access to flying suits that allow them to rain down hell from above. The player must quell this by taking them out with Carmelita's shock pistol. Carmelita missions are structured as bare-bones third-person shooter levels where the player can enter a strafing mode to dish out punishment and to dodge incoming lasers. The strafing mode is so much better than free roam though, and it doesn't impede your movement, so you'll barely ever leave it. The reason I call this a bare-bones third-person shooter level is because the reticle you're given is extremely generous, and that's underselling it. If your target is within this massive rectangle, you are going to land a hit. There's also no way for the gun to overheat, and so you can just spam shots until everything is dead. You may absorb some damage as you can't always see enemy projectiles until they connect, but it's really not a big deal as they don't deal out that much damage. At the very least, Sucker Punch introduced the ability for guards to chuck TNT at you, which does force you to keep moving around instead of just locking your legs and destroying everything in a spam of R1 Fury. So besides the pistol, Carmelita also has a kick move that's hardly ever useful, but, whatever. And her other defining trait is a mega jump that allows her to leap great distances into the air. This is useful for getting onto the tops of buildings to get a better vantage point for shooting. It's also fun to just explore the level as Carmelita for a little bit and try to reach the areas that not even Sly can. It adds another little dimension that I have enjoyed over the years. Carmelita gets a few more missions throughout the rest of the game. It's not many, but like I said, the game has more than double the amount of characters to play as than the previous game, and there's also 2 less episodes. The Carmelita jobs are fine for what they are, and out of all the new characters to play as, I'd probably rate her second best. Although, I should again mention, I would rather none of them be playable, but yeah. I mean, they are a decent change to the series' core gameplay, but unfortunately this game does that too many times. Our next mission, Tarball, sees Bentley reuniting with Murray to ask for his help in destroying Octavio's tar drums. The two share a nice moment where we see the real reason Murray has left the team. He feels guilty over Bentley's injury at the end of Sly 2. It's not hard to see how Murray grew into his own by the start of Sly 2 and took on the role of enforcer, and it probably gave him a sense of accomplishment after not really doing too much in the first game. So when he failed to keep his friend safe, he took it personally and felt he needed to walk away. Bentley realizes that he won't be able to recruit Murray until they make the Blackwater run pure, and so he asks his former teammate to help them in completing that task. Despite making Murray fully playable in the previous game, he still got the short end of the stick in terms of gameplay compared to the other 2 Cooper clan members. He didn't get nearly as many missions, and most of the ones he did receive focused on either spamming square to kill guards, or they were restrictive missions where he was forced to carry something around the map. Neither was very dynamic, and they attempt to spice Murray up here in the third game by introducing a new form for him. Murray can roll into a ball and use it destructively while also catching some serious height. I'm going to talk more about Murray's gameplay in the next chapter, but for now, we have to bounce around town and take out the tar drums. It's a nice introduction to this mechanic. They also include a detail that I love. Murray is anti-violent at this time, and so if you go out and attack a guard, you're gonna get a job failed screen. It's a nice nod to where he is at as a character during this moment in time. Run and Bomb is another one of those good old-fashioned Sly platforming missions where you feel like an athletic god. Bentley poses that by destroying Octavio's advertisements, that no one is going to show up to his recital, making his plan moot. To do this, Sly must blow up the balloons and signs by running firework explosives to each of his ads. You only end up doing this twice, and I wish there was a third one to complete. 2 feels like not enough, and 4 would have been too much. 3 was the sweet spot, and they kinda missed it. After blowing up the wire holding down the second balloon, it gets attached to a sign and Sly must climb up to free it. That right there checks the box for classic Sly platforming, and smashing the sign frees the balloon. Job finished. Right? Well, no. Bentley complains of an angry patron trying to force his way into the stand, and Sly must rush back to protect his friend. It's another reminder of the Murray's absence. If he was there, would this have happened? Anyway, Octavio is the perpetrator, and Sly must chase him down and avoid his traps along the way. It adds another sprinkle of platforming challenge, which is appreciated. My only knock against this mission is that Octavio gives up for no real reason at the end of it. He has Bentley kidnapped and he's back at his HQ, but he just surrenders Bentley back to freedom for no reason. I mean, he's on his own turf. His men are here. What chance does Sly have by himself? I think it would have made for an awesome inclusion, though, if Sly had to recruit Murray to help save Bentley by knocking out a lot of guards in some sort of daring rescue attempt. With that being said, though, it probably would have taken away from how this chapter ends, so maybe it is best how it is now. Well, look at that. I guess I just undid my own criticism on that one. Everything comes full circle, folks. How about it? Guard duty is one of the best missions in Sly-3 because it radiates the charming dialogue the series is known for while also involving multiple characters to play as, and for once, it gives us a good new mechanic. It's here where we are introduced to costumes that you can use to disguise yourself from guards. So when Sly dons a disguise, he can't perform any super stealth moves or engage in combat, but he can avoid contact with guards if the player can repeat back a 4-button combo. The guard asks Sly for the password and Bentley radios it in. If the player repeats it back perfectly, they're safe, but if not, they're caught and combat begins. 3 of the 6 chapters in this game will use this mechanic, but only in small amounts. I mean, don't get me wrong, I actually enjoy the inclusion of this disguise mechanic. It feels like something a thief would utilize. However, outside of missions where it's required, I never ever find myself using the disguises while roaming the overworld. It's just too slow, and running past guards is so much faster. There isn't enough of an incentive to use it outside of mission-specific moments, and I think that's a shame. I wish more development time had gone into this idea at the cost of some of the lesser ones. For crying out loud, there's only 3 missions in the game that require you to use a disguise, and I'd argue only the last one uses it in an interesting way. It's kinda half-baked how it is now, but it really had potential. I wish the game would have chosen just a few of these new inclusions and really focused on implementing them well instead of just trying to jam in so many new ideas and concepts. And of course, speaking of new mechanics, there's actually another new one introduced in this level, and it's kind of this art puzzle thing. After Sly takes over the guard's post, Bentley heads in to steal Octavio's blueprints for his tar vacuums. The mobster has posters up on the walls that hide safes containing the blueprints. In order to open them, the player must find the hidden number in the artwork, which is a cool little idea that I would have liked to see more of. Unfortunately, it's only used twice in the game, but it is a nice addition. The last safe also has an alarm wired to it, and the duo must then escape back to the safe house through a gang of goons. And I never understand why they retreat right back to the safe house. Doesn't this compromise the location of their base of operations? Anyway, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the great interactions Sly has with guards and Bentley throughout this sequence. Fans of the series will no doubt remember Tony the Killer Bee, Sly's terrible Italian accent that somehow works, and of course, who could forget the guy that wants to be buried in his mom's pasta sauce.
Am I glad you're here? Mom's making spaghetti tonight and I'm starving. I'm gonna eat like 4 plates of food.
I guess that you really like her cooking.
Mamma mia, I want to be buried in her sauce. It's heaven.
Any problems with that guy?
Said he wanted to be buried in his mom's pasta sauce. Yeah. That's strange.
It's charming dialogue like this that still gets a chuckle out of me every time I revisit this game. With all the jobs complete, Bentley breaks down the final operation in a classic slideshow presentation. I'm glad they brought these back. They always made me feel like a part of the gang. Our goal is to first eliminate Octavio's tar supply by bombing his pumps and then crashing a chandelier on his head to incapacitate him so that we can grab the destruction switch. After this, they plan to meet up with Murray, and with the issue resolved, he'd be free to rejoin the group. It of course doesn't go this way, but that's the plan. We start by using our disguise to break into Octavio's base of operations and encounter the mobster himself, and he unknowingly aids us by unlocking a double-buttoned security switch with Sly. We're only a few minutes into the operation, and we've already re-encountered two mechanics we used in previous jobs, the disguise and the two-button switch. I praise Sly-tly for reincorporating established mechanics into each chapter's end, and I have to extend the same applause to Sly-3. If you're introduced to a new mechanic throughout the missions, you're probably going to see it again in the final operation, and I love that. Once we reach the tar vacuum, the player takes control of Bentley and bombs the pumps while avoiding guards. This can actually prove to be tricky given the moving parts surrounding each target, but with time, you destroy the vacuums and head outside for Phase 2, interrupting Octavio's recital and grabbing that destruction switch. Bentley challenges Octavio to a duet, and this sequence remains just as cringe-inducing as it probably was in 2005. They didn't do a great job with recording Bentley's quote-unquote singing, and it sounds awful. I mean, it is dreadful.
La 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 la.
La, la, la.
La la la
I assume it's meant to sound this way, but it just doesn't align with the visuals most of the time, and it's just bad, if not a little funny. What I really admire here is seeing Bentley's confidence, though, carrying over from the second game. He goes at Octavio without hesitation. While the two sing, Sly tries to cut down the chandelier and crash it on Octavio's head, but Carmelita shoots down the projectile, putting a screeching halt to this plan. Octavio and the Cooper clan escape using the canal systems, and the boat from Canal Chase is brought back once again. For the first time ever, I got this weird glitch, where this next sequence didn't start and load in properly, and I was just stuck looking at Sly and Bentley as they crashed into everything with these intent looks on their faces. I had to restart the mission to fix this, but this was truly the only major bug I encountered during this playthrough. Anyway, we shoot out Octavio's boat just like we did with the Blue Viper Gondola gang, and we end up crashing near the plaza. Murray has arrived and watches on, admiring the destruction that just took place. It's got his blood pumping, and he's ready for action. Octavio assaults Bentley, knocking him out of his wheelchair and putting him in danger. Sly pleads with Murray to help him defeat the mobster, but the hippo hesitates given his promise to the guru. All it takes for him to break it, though, is Bentley calling out for his aid. We know that Murray left the team after feeling guilty for not being able to save Bentley at the end of the previous game, and so seeing that situation start to repeat itself, Murray knows what he must do. He rips off his necklace, belts out an awesome threat, and goes in fist first for Octavio.
Murray, I need your help. I've never seen someone move that fast. Octavio's old, but he's still got it. Let's take him together.
But I vowed to my guru that I'd renounce all violence, and the water is still black.
It'll be clear any minute. Trust me. Now, let's take him.
You're right to be scared, Hippo. Your wheelchair friend should have been so smart.
Murray! Help!
That does it! I'll floss my teeth with your spine! Murray returns!
Sucker Punch did a great job setting up this moment over the entirety of this first chapter, and Murray's triumphant return feels earned and more impactful because of it. It's easily one of the most character-defining moments for Murray throughout the entire series, and unlike his transformation into the Murray between Sly 1 and Sly 2, this moment is actually shown to the player, and so it's much more impactful, and I love it. The boss fight with Octavio is also one of the more challenging ones across the entire series because he can dish out damage in a hurry. Because of this, they actually made Murray receive smaller increments of damage, even less than standard enemies, in this fight, and I think that's smart given this is the first time we've controlled the character in combat since the previous game. Octavio will also dodge every punch unless he's trapped in tar, which slows his movement speed. It uses the villain's plan against him, and that's good. Octavio has a couple ways to hit you, including kicks, belly flops, tar balls, a flurry of punches, and of course, the destructive vocal notes of a good opera song. But he doesn't get this last move until you have to relocate the fight on the other side of the map, which is another sequence I appreciate. I like that it doesn't just all wrap up here in this location, and that Murray and Sly actually have to think on their toes in order to defeat Octavio. It's frantic being chased all over the map by this guy.
Have more power, but I am not holding back no longer. Listen to the song of your death! The Murray knows no song, but the triumphant horn section of his own triumph! Quit talking, stupid kid, and die!
Like I said, it's one of the best fights in the series, probably a top 5 for me, maybe even a top 3. With Octavio defeated, Murray is free to rejoin the team, and the trio make their escape. Octavio is one of my favorite villains in the franchise, because he feels like a true threat that the team must overcome, especially without the direct aid of Murray. He feels like a powerful obstacle that Sly and Bentley must find a way to overcome if they want to win their friend back. If Octavio was a pushover, then snapping Murray out of his funk wouldn't have meant as much as it did. I mean, he doesn't just stand idly by waiting for you to ruin his operation. He assaults Bentley, he uses corrupted policemen to get rid of the photo evidence you took, and he smartly placed alarms on some of his safes to stop intruders. He's intimidating, and he's got a plan with a large mob force backing him up. Defeating all of that makes Murray's return to the team feel earned. With that, the first chapter of Sly 3 comes to an end, and the team sets out to recruit someone else. Our next mission takes us to the Australian outback as Murray looks to reconnect with his guru after developing a sinking feeling that he has let his sensei down. Sly and Bentley recognize how important this is to Murray and want to help their friend find closure. At the same time, Sly realizes that this is a golden opportunity to expand the Cooper clan for a shot at getting inside the vault. Murray tells stories about how the Guru mastered the Dreamtime techniques, which allow him to mind control weak-minded people and transform in order to blend into the environment. Arriving in the outback, the gang is stunned to see that the Guru is nowhere to be found and that a bunch of miners have shown up and are decimating the landscape. With the setting established, Chapter 2 is set to begin. The first task is tracking down the Guru, and it's up to Sly to accomplish this. Murray asks Sly to find him and tell him that he wants to break off his training, which is a sign that the Herculean hippo is a bit timid to talk to his former master. It's a narrative tool used to once again have you play as Sly for the first mission in every chapter, but it's a good enough reason. I think the series traditionally has you play as Sly at the beginning of each chapter because he's got the acrobatic abilities, meaning he can traverse the landscape much easier. If the player isn't familiar with the layout of the level yet, you might as well give them the most versatile character to explore with from the beginning. Anyway, this is a pretty standard platforming mission where you visit 3 locations while searching for the Guru. We quickly discover that he isn't at his cave or at his hut, and the team deduces that the miners have probably kidnapped him. They're able to track him down to a makeshift jail cell, and Sly begins to talk to the Aborigine. The Guru is one of those characters that speaks in gibberish, but everyone in-universe understands him, while you the player cannot. It leads to that awkward writing style where the character that the Guru is talking to pretty much has to repeat everything he is saying to give the player context. I've never been a big fan of this writing style, but what do I know? I mean, I'm not a writer, as you can probably tell from this script full of babble. The Guru decrees that he will not leave until his gear has been recovered, which seems kind of stupid to me. At least let the gang bust you out of jail and then worry about your gear. Why stay in prison? What purpose does that serve? It's basically used to set up the next set of missions, so I guess it's fine. He also tasks us with destroying the mining equipment that is drilling into Ayers Rock. I'm not going to delve into it, but there's certainly a statement being made here about environmentalism and the destruction of people's culture. I think it's a good message. Respect other people and respect the world we live in. Not a bad notion to be presenting to young minds. It's time for Murray to meet with the Guru for the first time since he left on his voyage, and he's a little nervous. He fears that his master will reject him given the fact that he broke his oath of peace, but Bentley, being the great friend that he is, convinces him to push onward. Spelunking serves as an introduction to two things, playing as Murray outside of his ball form, as well as the antagonist of this episode, the Mask of Dark Earth. Easily the worst Sly villain of all time, bar none. This mission will be focused on teaching the player how to throw objects and guards. They introduce it to you gradually by giving you some guards and rocks to throw at some stalagmites. Or stalactites, whichever these are, I can never remember. But the challenge elevates as the level goes on. A flashlight guard will have to be knocked out using rocks before jumping across and using him as a projectile. And later, a flashlight guard will be used as a projectile, but he bounces back onto the platform you stand on, which requires the player to dispose of him then. These throwing-based tasks are periodically broken up with ball form techniques, where Murray must bounce on some pistons to unlock doors. It's a good change of pace. The level culminates with a confrontation with a guard wearing the Mask of Dark Earth, which has increased his size. It's here where the final challenge testing your understanding of the throwing mechanic is set upon you. You throw this guard a total of 6 times against the drills in order to finish the stage. The flashlight guard will attack you, and the drill bits are also moving, which is a good step up in difficulty and challenge from what we've seen so far using this throwing mechanic. Murray reaches the Guru, and the two talk about what happened in Venice, as well as the current state of the Outback. The Guru seems keen on joining the gang, but is tied to the land and cannot leave it until it's been liberated. Murray promises to help kick out the miners while destroying their gyrocopter and the Mask of Dark Earth. Spelunking is a well-designed stage, and it sets up what's to come in the next batch of missions quite nicely. Dark Caves is our next mission, and as we get into it here, I wanted to briefly pay my respects to a fallen presentation choice, the 3D mode. As I've mentioned before, this third game in the trilogy was keen on stuffing as many new mechanics and ideas into the game as possible, regardless of quality. One of the biggest marketing gimmicks, if not the biggest, was that some of the levels could be played in 3D. That's right, the game came with a pair of 3D glasses that could be worn during specific levels. The player would be given the option to play it naturally or with the 3D mode, and being able to decline 3D was one of the smartest moves the team made. I'm going to be honest with you, I bought Sly-tly new, and I had these 3D glasses, but I never once used them. I remember years later, after I had lost the glasses, I actually tried to play through a mission with it enabled just to see, and to no surprise, it looked horrible without the glasses. But even with them, I can't imagine it looked that great. I have to imagine many kids lost or broke their glasses, and I'd be stunned to see anyone who still has an intact pair. In fact, if you are watching this, and you have a pair of original 3D glasses from Sly-tly, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below or see a picture of them on Twitter. You can find me at NopNapNarp. Anyway, the 3D mode was disabled in the remastered version, and that's what I'm playing here, so rest in peace to a terrible idea. Back to the mission now, we're asked to recover the Guru's gear as Sly. This involves platforming, cracking open safes, and some combat intense sections, and it makes for a good mixture. The first cave system is about platforming, as you'll have to swing, climb, and leap your way to the back in order to get the moonstone before hauling ass out of there to stop it from exploding. That's right, the miners apparently hooked up a light-sensitive detonator that will blow up the moonstone if it isn't exposed to light after a certain period of time. It's gibberish, let's be honest. What the hell does that even mean? It's a goofy excuse to implement a time challenge. I mean, a light-sensitive detonator? Is that real? Do we have those? I just don't get it. The second cave system is much shorter, and it won't take you long to reach the moonstaff. I wish there was a little bit more platforming here, but no, you just gotta swing from a couple of hooks, and you're there. At least they continue to use the safe cracking mechanic that they introduced in the first chapter. The final section of this job is probably one of the most infamous sections of any level across the entire series. At least to me it is. You have to escape the cave before time runs out, but there's a ton of guards thrown at you at once, and you have very limited space to maneuver in. It wouldn't be so bad, except for the fact that the guards in this chapter can kick up dust to cloud your vision and hit you with a whip attack that comes with a knockback effect. It's very easy to get stun locked into this loop where a dingo whips you off the side, you spawn back up there, and then you get whipped again. Rinse and repeat until your health hits 0. It's frustrating, but luckily I only died once to this on this playthrough. But with that, we've accomplished our goal of recovering the Guru's gear. The next mission is called Big Truck, and it's aptly named. Sly and Murray must appease the Guru's wishes to see Ayers Rock purified, and they'll need to use this massive truck in order to accomplish that. The plan is to capture and release a bunch of giant scorpions onto the miners so that they'll clear out. To do this, Sly must activate one of the massive drills and rile up the scorpions. You clear a couple of guards at first, but later you have to scale to the top of the drills to throw another switch. The main part of this mission is driving the big truck around and using its ability to flip over to capture scorpions. I alluded to it earlier, but this is the job where it really hit me. Sly-tly relies heavily on vehicle-based minigames. Every chapter includes at least one, and to me, this is one of the weaker ones. I mean, the truck control's fine and all, but there really isn't much to it. You just hit R1, and it'll flip the truck, and you'll nab a scorpion. The tires do overheat though, and so you do have to occasionally cool them off by driving into water or running over scorpions. I don't really have much else to say about this mission. I mean, it's not the worst vehicle-based system in the game. Oh, no, that comes much later. But it doesn't add much mechanically to make this mission feel worthwhile or even memorable. The next mission can only be started while playing as Bentley, and if you hadn't noticed yet, not one single mission has seen us playing only as the turtle using his base mechanics. He's piloted the gondola in Venice, he's cracked the art saves, and he blew up the tar pumps, but those were all missions that either involved Sly or a vehicle. We're halfway through the second chapter, and one of the main characters still hasn't gotten a level where his mechanics can shine in full. And guess what? This isn't one either, and I'd argue we're still a full chapter away from reaching the first one. This really makes the inclusion of so many vehicle levels and gimmicky mini mechanics feel all the more noticeable and worse. Bentley meets up with the Guru to deliver his gear and recruits him to destroy some of the miners' local operation. The Guru becomes the 5th playable character of the game, but just like with Carmelita, you can't select him to play as in the safe room, even after he joins your team. I understand why Carmelita wouldn't be in that position, but I never understood why the Guru and a later character were never made fully playable. So it's here where I want to break down the Guru's gameplay and share my thoughts on it. The Guru is played like a defensive character. He can't really do any direct damage, but he is still capable of dealing out some pain. He has two main abilities. First, he can transform into an object found in the natural environment in order to blend into his surroundings and leave guards confused. By holding down L1, the Guru will spin his moonstone into the air, and after a few seconds, he will transform and stay like this until you release the button. It's meant to be an escape option to use when he's detected and is trying to flee from guards. And I gotta admit, I always like seeing the different things he can transform into, but it does lead to some weird moments, like transforming into a shrub while on an elevated glass walking panel. No harm, no foul, I guess, but it does look kinda odd. Anyway, it's a pretty basic mechanic that can be super useful given the fact that the Guru can't deal any direct damage. His second major ability is that he can leap on the backs of unsuspecting guards and take control of their minds, which gives him full power over them. This includes using their attacks against other guards, or using their bodies as a projectile to slam into things. This is the best part about playing as the Guru, taking control over different enemy types and experimenting with their attack patterns. Taking control over our enemies isn't something we've gotten to do yet in the series, and building a character that lets us do that provides a novel experience and a fun distraction. You only get to play as him a handful of times, but by far this is the most enjoyable component of his mechanics. Anyway, the Guru must go about destroying some drills using controlled guards. Once he has control over a target, they can't stop running forward, and so it does provide a little extra challenge for the player to line things up while moving on the fly. The second challenge even asks the player to leap over a couple of pits, which ups the experience just a tad more. Just like with all the other new playable characters, the Guru gets 1 or 2 unique mechanics for missions to be structured around. Out of all the new playable characters, I'd probably put the Guru at third best or second worst, because he gets 2 unique mechanics instead of just 1, and you actually get to control him in the overworld. He's not poorly implemented, I just wish he wasn't implemented at all. In order to defeat the Mask of Dark Earth, the gang is going to need a sample of uranium, and so Sly and Murray must team up to decimate an oil rig and use its drill to collect the goods. I don't particularly like this mission, but I love the character moment we get before it starts. Basically, Sly and Murray both admit that they hardly ever listen when Bentley is breaking down the plan in his slideshows. It always gets a chuckle out of me. Anyway, it's another vehicle-based job where we have to use a claw machine. It's capable of both picking up and dropping objects as well as throwing things a great distance. You first must protect the oil lines as Murray works to pump the oil. To do this, you have to stop guards from damaging the different parts, and you accomplish that by dropping explosives on them or by launching them into the electric fence. It's incredibly easy to snag up every guard and chuck them before they even reach the parts you're trying to protect. I mean, there is potential for a snowball effect to take place if you let too many get through, but it almost never happens because the guards don't run up fast enough. I mean, I am a grown man playing a game primarily meant for youngsters, but still. And on top of that, the guards do so little damage to the rig that letting one slip past for a little bit won't cost you the mission. It really is child's play. I guess the last section elevates the challenge a teeny bit by making you drop rocks onto a catapult for Murray to launch while also stopping the same guards. But again, it's not difficult in any sense of the word. So the claw ends up being a mission that doesn't challenge the player, but also doesn't incorporate any of the staple mechanics that the series is known for. So because of that, it's one of the most lackluster missions in the game. Luckily though, this terrible mission is about to be followed up by one of the series' most iconic and beloved missions, Lemon Rage. Before that though, I want to take some time to talk about Murray's gameplay throughout Honor Among Thieves. I've mentioned throughout this series that Murray has often felt like the character that's been left behind both narratively and mechanically. Sly was always the field man, and Bentley was always the brains. meaning that those two had the most screen time. Murray fills the role of the brawn, but the developers failed to give him as many things to do in Band of Thieves as his counterparts. It's here in Honor Among Thieves where Murray gets the most amount of development, both as a character and in his gameplay. And even though I don't think the new mechanics are that worthwhile, I'm just glad that he got equal attention this time. I won't waste a lot of time talking about the returning mechanics for Murray. He's great in combat and he can throw things, and that remains true in this game. He gets two big additions in Honor Among Thieves. The first is the ability to pickpocket, and I hate this decision. This applies to Bentley too, since he can steal now as well. So Murray can shake down guards to get valuables and coins out of their pockets. I have to imagine this idea was implemented because someone, somewhere, complained about being out in the field in Band of Thieves and seeing guards with loot, but being unable to steal it because they weren't playing as Sly. The solution then became allowing each of our three main characters to have the ability to pickpocket, and to me, it's a subtraction through addition. Allowing every character to pickpocket dilutes Sly's abilities and strips away a distinct trait from that character. I don't think this change was completely necessary, and I hardly ever find myself pickpocketing as either Murray or Bentley. At least in this case, Murray's ability to shake down an enemy is much faster than Bentley's method. The second major mechanic that Murray gets is the ball form that we saw in the previous chapter. While I don't find the ball form to be particularly useful outside of specific missions, I'm still glad they included it because it provides Murray with another mission type to engage with. Band of Thieves struggled to come up with things for Murray to do, and introducing this ancient technique to his repertoire makes him more fleshed out. Using this move allows our hippo hero to tuck into a ball, which can be used to reach great heights given the proper airtime. Specific missions have Murray use this downward energy to smash up guards or objects in the environment to complete missions. You can also tuck into the ball form at any time and roll around the environment at a slightly faster speed than sprinting. I mean, again, I'm more appreciative that they gave Murray something to do, but by no means is the ball form some immaculate addition that elevates the game dramatically. But at least it's something. That brings us back to our next mission, Lemon Rage. The gang believes that by taking over the local bar, the miners will be turfless and feel compelled to leave. In order to seize control, the trio challenge some miners to a chug-off to see who will run this bar from here on out. The introduction to this mission is one of the best moments in this game, so I'm just going to let it play out. It does a great job of framing the personality of each character.
Alright boys, look tough and get angry. It's time to intimidate the locals.
I'm not sure I can do it. How do you guys get angry?
Find the match deep inside yourself. Light it, and let the fire burn up your guts and boil your blood!
Yeah, I pretty much do the same thing. Look, our goal is to drive away these miners, and we'll do whatever it takes.
With that, we chug off against the miners, and I think the reason this mission is so beloved is because it incorporates all the OG members of the gang, and it's just so different from what we normally see from them. This is a group that likes to go in quiet and sneaky and with a plan, and here we are loudly announcing ourselves and starting a barroom brawl. It might have felt out of place if our characters didn't feel so true to themselves, but they do, and it just works. And I love the small detail that Sly chugs his lemonade at a medium pace, Murray pounds it down, and Bentley is super slow. It just makes sense for their characters. The miners end up being pissed when they lose and accuse Bentley of cheating since he spilled so much, and it's kind of a fair point. This leads to a massive fight where we get a chance to take out a ton of guards while switching between each character. It's super enjoyable. The mission culminates with a boss fight against a guard wearing the Mask of Dark Earth. This is the weakest part of the mission because it gets repetitive after a few rounds. You have to guide the dingo either towards a bomb or a barrel to knock him out before dealing damage to Sly. It feels kind of rinse and repeat, but luckily it doesn't overstay its welcome enough to sour a great mission. Get it? Sour? Lemonade? You're right, that was terrible, but Lemon Rage is easily one of the best missions in this game and throughout the entire series. Our final job before the big heist is teaching a local crocodile to enjoy the taste of miners by feeding a couple of them to him. It's here where I want to discuss the changes to enemy behavior and guard AI from Sly-2 to Sly-3. Given that the two games share a similar structure, the guard patterns and AI haven't changed all that much. Guards still patrol the overworld and will chase you down if you get into their line of sight. Just like in Band of Thieves, only about 5 guards will ever pursue you at one time, but it actually feels like they spend less time chasing after you in this game. Flashlight guards especially will remain idle for a few seconds if they damage you with a ranged attack, and if you're sprinting away during this time, they usually give up. It remains easiest to escape from guards while playing as Sly, since he can climb, or as Murray since he can decimate enemies. Bentley's best bet remains using sleep darts before passing by guards, given his limited mobility and low damage output. I mentioned in the Sly-2 video that I wish enemies acted differently from mission to mission to give each of them more of a flair. That idea would have made things less predictable for the player, and given the intended age of those players, maybe it was for the best. However, it's still something I wish was true here, and it just isn't. The only real new addition to mention to enemy AI is how they respond to your attacks. Most interestingly, smaller guards are now capable of jumping over some of your attacks when you play as Sly and Bentley. They don't do it super often, but giving them a dodge maneuver can at least throw you off momentarily. Flashlight guards are still landlocked though, and cannot jump or reach rooftops. Flashlight guards don't use their melee attack nearly as much in Sly-3, and it is pretty easy to dodge here. But to balance this, they're capable of absorbing more damage since you'll hit them more often. And this doesn't always look the best because you can smack a guard and he will just kind of shake and not break his attack animation. Maybe that's something I noticed solely because I've played this game so many times though, I'm not sure. The only other real change of note is that flashlight guards don't always connect on their ranged attacks. It at least feels like they miss far more often than their Sly-2 counterparts. Overall, I do wish standard guards roaming the overworld provided more of a challenge instead of just being walking ATMs for gathering coins and high valuable items. At the end of Hungry Croc, a miner wearing the Mask of Dark Earth comes along and is eaten up, but not before the mask escapes. This makes for 3 times now where we've seen the mask escape, and so the final operation will be about silencing it for good. So, coming into this script, I decided that I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time discussing the villains, more so than I did in the Sly-2 video. But you aren't going to get that here. It's a mask, it doesn't talk, it doesn't have character, it just sucks. I guess its purpose was to allow Carmelita to take center stage during this heist, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Our first task is stopping the gyrocopter, and this is a job for the Guru. He has to ram a couple of guards into the side of it, but the catch is he can't get too close to it. This means you have to line up a guard and jump off as he continues to run up and smash the aircraft. You do this 3 times, and it wasn't hard for me personally, but it might be for a newcomer given the limited amount of space to line things up properly. Once that's done, Murray attempts to thunderflop the mask to death. Yes, you heard that right, but he fails and it ends up attaching itself to Carmelita. This causes her to grow larger and chase after the gang, which leads to the team having to improv. Bentley tags Carmelita with some of his sleep darts in the hopes that it will knock her out, and this is probably the best part of the heist because it can be a challenge to line up your shots as she's constantly moving. And to be honest, this is the only time that Sly-3 emphasizes this key ability from the previous game, using Bentley's sleep darts. The moment feels hectic, and this gameplay reflects that sentiment. This plan doesn't end up working though, and Carmelita continues to grow even bigger, but we don't get the chance to see her character model grow, which is dumb. Show us Karma larger, that's all we want to see. The gang escapes to the big truck and tries to literally blow up the mast by chucking explosive barrels at Carmelita. Wow. This section is a drag and it goes on for too long as you just gather up barrels and throw them back at her over and over again. You'll also be trying to rush it so that the barrels don't explode and damage you, and it leads to you inadvertently screwing things up. I guess the developers felt like they had to use the crane twice since they spent development time on it, but it just doesn't work for me. That plan doesn't end up working either, as Carmelita continues to grow and rampage. The only solution seems to be climbing up her sides and unhooking the mask to try to pry it off of her. I think the reason that they made the mask the villain was so that it could be used as a catalyst to discuss Sly and Carmelita's relationship more. We've seen it a few times already. The game dedicates a few lines of dialogue here and there towards establishing a romance between these two, and part of that effort is carried over from the previous two games. Murray and Bentley kinda tease Sly here on the chance to get super close to Carmelita. It's my belief that these little moments are designed to make the ending of this game feel more impactful to newcomers while reminding returning series players of that romance. Anyway, Sly shimmies up her legs twice, knocks off the mask, and it goes out in a blaze of glory due to a barrage of bullets. Good riddance, to be honest. There's a reason why Rumble Down Under is often considered one of the worst chapters in the series, and most of that blame falls on the mask. But it also doesn't help that there's so many vehicle missions. With that, another episode is wrapped up, and for the first time ever, the Cooper Gang welcomes a new member into its ranks. The gang isn't done yet though, as Bentley realizes that in order to pull off the Cooper Vault job, the group is going to need to recruit a better RC specialist than himself. He happens to meet a girl with these talents online and asks her to join them. She says she only works for the best and will only join up with the crew if they can defeat her boss, the Black Baron, at his own game. With that, the gang heads to Holland to enter into the Aces flight competition. After establishing a base of operations, the gang gets started with tracking down a flight roster so that they can sabotage their competition. Dimitri acts as a mole for the group after being hired as a color commentator. Sly meets up with him, and after another one of those dialogue option sections, he promises to do Dimitri a favor in exchange for helping them. We are then introduced to the Black Baron, and then it's revealed that Mugshot, one of the villains from the first game, is here as well, and pairing him up with Dimitri makes this the most fan service chapter in the original trilogy. The Baron makes it clear that this is his turf, and he will do anything possible to prevent cheating, even if it means beating trespassers to death. They use this to establish and justify the presence of guards throughout this level, and it's always been one of the weaker justifications to me. As we make our way up to the castle, I wanted to point out that this game removed clue bottles, which were a staple of the series up until this point. In the previous two games, collecting a level or hub world's clue bottles would grant the player access to a power-up, but they're not found anywhere in Sly-tly, and I'm not sure why. I'm not a game designer, but it really seems like something that would have been pretty easy to implement, and so I don't get why we don't find it here. We then must scale the Baron's castle to grant Bentley access so that he can crack open some more of the artwork saves we saw back in Chapter 1. These two puzzles are far easier to solve than the first set because the numbers on them are huge and they pop out immediately, which wasn't the case before. This really trivializes things, and honestly, these two sets of paintings from Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 should have been flipped. That way, it would have been a natural evolution and elevation of difficulty within this mechanic, but with how it is now, it's the opposite, and I don't get it. After analyzing the flight roster, Bentley comes to the conclusion that the gang will need to pit their two competitors, Iceland and Belgium, against one another to boost their odds of victory in the semifinals. This game gets away from the thiefy vibes that permeated throughout Band of Thieves, but this mission, as well as the following mission, bring back that feeling, making them some of the best in the game. Before we break it down though, I wanted to very quickly mention the camera in Sly-tly. It worked properly about 97% of the time in Band of Thieves, but it would occasionally get stuck on walls or in cramped hallways. In some levels, this could even lead to taking damage. I'm happy to report that this is a non-issue in Honor Among Thieves. If the camera does get stuck, it will reset itself quickly so not to inhibit the player, and even getting stuck on anything is quite rare. At no point in my playthrough did the camera act as an intrusion upon my enjoyment of the game. By making sure it didn't get stuck on anything for very long, the team completely solved that minor issue. One reason why I love this set of missions is that it gets the whole team involved. In this mission, you will split time between playing as Murray, Bentley, Sly, and the Guru, which is awesome. They found a way to incorporate the skill sets and mechanics of each of them. You start as Murray and have to get one of the Belgian pilots in a fit of laughter, which allows Bentley to pick his pocket undetected. Then, the Guru must ram guards into the back of a truck carrying Iceland's lucky sculpture. This actually proves to be challenging, as the truck will spit out a ton of bear traps to prevent you from coasting by. In addition to that, the truck has some laser security too, meaning you have to line things up just right to make it past this section. With that done, Sly runs down the truck, leaps in, cracks the safe, and leaves the incriminating evidence behind. What more could you want from a Sly Cooper mission? You play as every character, there's laughs, there's thieving, there's challenge. It's one of the best missions in the game, and the same goes for its counterpart, which we come to next. In order to frame Iceland, the gang decides to steal one of their iconic Viking helmets and place it on the destroyed remains of Belgium's best plane. Sly and Murray must first use a raft to navigate the sewers to reach Iceland's room. Murray wonders why they don't just force the lock, but Bentley rebuttals by saying that doing so may convince some people that they're innocent. If someone tampered with their room, who's to say they weren't set up? It's a nice little detail showing how careful Bentley is when planning out their missions and operations. Moving through the sewers isn't too much work, but Sucker Punch did include a plentiful number of obstacles to traverse while also arranging them in interesting ways to get players to think about how these hindrances interact with each other. From there, Sly must complete a quick platforming section before making his way out of the room. It was a great idea to include rudimentary alarms within the team's room because it provides some obstacles for the player to consider while also adding to the world building. It shows how afraid teams are of being sabotaged and further establishes the tournament's tumultuous past events. It works well in pushing both the gameplay and story forward, and I like that. After escaping through an alternate sewer pipe that contains even tougher to navigate obstacles, Murray must make his way to Belgium's hangar and plant the evidence. He first must destroy the anchors using his ball form in a new way. Up until this point, the ball move was used vertically, but here the emphasis is on moving horizontally. It's a small change of pace for this mechanic, but with the plane destroyed and the evidence placed, the Cooper gang's job here is complete. The night isn't over yet though, as Bentley has been working hard to ensure that the gang's own plane is under safekeeping. Cooper Hangar Defense is arguably the most challenging mission in the game, and heavily involves 3 different mechanics. The first of those is basic combat, and so it's here where I wanted to talk about how this game handles it. To be honest with you, it remains largely unchanged from Sly 2, and since I've already outlined my thoughts in that video, I don't want to spend a ton of time rehashing the same points here. Combat difficulty still varies depending on who you play as. Murray plows through guards easily by spamming square, Bentley does little melee damage, but has sleep darts and bombs to compensate, and Sly falls somewhere in the middle. He can fight, but he's better suited using his climbing talents to his advantage. Each character fights differently enough to make them stand out from one another, but not too much as to create vastly different playstyles. A lot of the same moves return from Sly 2, including uppercuts, basic melee attacks, and explosives if you're playing as Bentley. Once again, an assortment of power-ups can be used to enhance your combat abilities, but they remain on the fringe of relevancy. Running away from combat remains the dominant strategy, even though the aim of guards has been somewhat nerfed. They just don't chase you long enough to justify staying in a fight and taking damage. There really isn't much else to say about combat in Sly-3 except for this cool little inclusion that wasn't in Band of Thieves. Bentley's wheelchair is capable of throwing bombs right into guards' pockets if you sneak up on them. It's a little explosive flair to his combat style. It's not much, it's not some huge mechanic, it's just a little tweak, and I really love it. As you can see, I've been talking over the footage from this mission, and yes, Mugshot is back. He actually makes his presence felt in this chapter by first attacking your plane, and later getting into a scuffle with Carmelita. I'm glad they didn't just bring him back to exist, like the developer saying, "Hey, you guys remember him, huh? Yeah, we do too, we love him." No, they actually wrote him into this chapter's story, so kudos to Sucker Punch for that. After defeating him and his paid-off goons, Bentley realizes that Mugshot's onslaught is continuing from the sewers below. Bentley must use a series of defensive systems to stop them from reaching the plane. Now, never in my life have I seen a building that contains an open passageway leading into the sewer system, let alone two, but I guess we can confirm that that is canon in the Sly universe. This is how bunkers are built. This part of the job is an homage to the Bad Mojo Collection level in Band of Thieves. The setup is nearly identical. You have to use traps to stop guards from reaching an object that you need to protect, a la a tower defense game of sorts. It's more difficult here though because they make you contend with two sets of traps at one time and have guards flood each tunnel at the same time. Even after playing this game so many times, I still struggled to stop every guard from coming through, and I almost lost and had to restart. I found myself kind of panicking and hitting buttons without thought, which is a rare occurrence for me in these games. Despite the difficulty boost, this counterpart isn't as memorable as the original from Band of Thieves, probably because the level in Band of Thieves had a greater sense of atmosphere. Bentley was actually in the physical space there, making the threat feel more immediate, and that isn't the case here. With the onslaught quelled, Bentley realizes that their hellish night isn't over yet. Guards and tanks are coming to obliterate their hangar, and he recruits Penelope to help. We haven't really seen much of Penelope in this mission, but it's by design to set up a plot twist. There really isn't much to talk about when it comes to her gameplay, since she mostly just handles the RC-related jobs. She ends up being the first of the new characters who's implemented primarily for story reasons rather than new gameplay additions. Regardless though, right now she has to protect our bunker by launching guards skyward using her RC chopper. In Band of Thieves, this thing could drop bombs and shoot forward, but both of those features are taken away in this game's introduction to the mechanic. Here, we can only drop a claw onto guards and use it to sling them great distances. This involves first lining up the shot, and then power boosting back and forth until they are launched, and this takes a few bursts for larger enemies. It's far more engaging because of the numerous steps involved. You can't just drop a bomb and be done with it. It's funny how much depth is added to the mechanic just by including a second step. Having to launch guards requires more button inputs from the player and also takes more time, which allows other enemies to continue their approach, and that elevates the challenge. It's got to be nearly impossible to take no damage on this section, and it elevates the tension for the player when they're busy yanking a tank while a few guards are getting in clean hits on the bunker. Eventually though, you do stop all the attacks. Cooper Hangar Defense is not one of my personal favorites from the game, but I do respect it as a very well designed level that makes the player sweat more than most missions within Sly-3. With all those missions complete, the gang turns their attention to the semifinals. Sly must pilot the team's plane and take out the competition by eliminating 25 other planes. So yeah, this is another vehicle section, but it's by far the best the game has to offer. The plane is given plenty of space to fly, boost, and barrel roll in to give the player a sense of true freedom. You also have to properly navigate all the damage from incoming planes while dishing out a heavy dose of punishment of your own. It's important to not absorb a lot of damage early on because planes will still continue to attack you even as their numbers dwindle. These flying missions also just have a great sense of atmosphere. You get a real sense of just how outnumbered you actually are, and other planes will sometimes crash into one another and explode, showing off the high stakes. I don't honestly have a ton to say about it, except that every design aspect of this level comes together so well and creates an enjoyable and memorable experience for the player without overstaying its welcome, and that's why it's the best vehicle section in the game. I think it's here where Sucker Punch realized that they were criminally underusing Bentley, as the next 3 jobs all have to be started with the turtle. The first of these is Beauty and the Beast, probably the funniest mission in the game. The gang decides to pit Carmelita against Mugshot so that he will be arrested and therefore unable to fly in the finals. To make this happen, Bentley must pick a fight with the Meathead. Even though I know that choosing the option to insult his mother is what triggers the end of this sequence, I still always sit through all the other insults. It's comedy gold seeing a character like Bentley dishing out insults against Mugshot's breath, his appearance, and of course, his mother. It's hilarious. If you're a fan of the series, you love this section. Just admit it.
Your mother was a broken down tub of junk with more gentleman callers than the operator.
Nobody talks that way about my mother. Nobody! Okay, little broken down runt. Looks like you're gonna get broken down even more.
Town Square, 5 minutes. Please don't be late.
Meanwhile, Sly tracks down Carmelita and lures her back to the town square, where Mugshot waits to pummel Bentley. She loses track of Sly and turns her focus on taking down Mugshot, and it's here where we get our second dose of her gameplay. This is probably my favorite of these Carmelita sections because we're free to lead Mugshot all over the map. I love jumping from rooftop to rooftop and reaching high up places while Mugshot follows behind. The player is the one in charge of directing this deadly dance, and I think that makes it pretty good. On top of that, it creates these cool action moments where you're hammering him with shock blasts while mega jumping over his incoming bullets. It's the closest the series ever comes to a full shootout, and that's including Tennessee Kid Cooper's level in Sly 4. After dishing out enough punishment, Mugshot collapses and is promptly arrested, which ensures he won't be able to defeat the Baron before you in the finals. Before we dive into our next job, I wanted to discuss the animation in Honor Among Thieves. In my Band of Thieves video, I talked about how the animation was used to reflect the personality of each character, and that remains true here, with a lot of those animations returning from its predecessor. Once again, I don't want to waste time hashing out all that information, and so I'm going to focus instead on the new animations that are included. Despite copying a lot of animations from the previous game, Sucker Punch still had a lot of work to do within this sequel. Not only does the game contain a new cast of villains to design and animate, but there's also a ton of new playable characters to properly implement as well. Now, they did take some shortcuts, considering only 3 out of the 5 new playable characters needed to be animated in gameplay alongside of cutscenes instead of just the latter. Still, there was a lot of work to be done, and they succeeded in making these new characters just as lively as our original cast of 3. Speaking of that original cast, Sly, Murray, and Bentley all have new animations to go along with the returning ones. Sly has a new set of tiered moves that include a beefed up spin mechanic and uppercut. Murray now has his ball form, which must have been one of the easier things to animate since he just rolls up and then rolls around. Bentley must have been the one to provide the most challenge though, considering he has a completely different design in this game. Placing Bentley into a wheelchair meant rebuilding this character's movement speed and style, and they did a good job of maintaining the norm while crafting something new. When sprinting, Bentley really gets those arms moving, and I imagine he should be more jacked than he is, but that's beside the point. And to end this bit on animation, a few extra details were included to polish things up. When you land from a jump, a little dust cloud will be kicked up to give weight to the landing. This also applies to when Bentley is sprinting and his wheels kick up dirt. The way fists, canes, and wheels spin to hit foes has also been cleaned up. All in all, the animations in Sly 3 work as intended. It's the same case as with Sly 2, they are starting to show their age, but they do a good job of reflecting the characters' personalities. Giant Wolf Massacre sees the player controlling Bentley and then the Guru as they attempt to thin out the ranks of the Baron's pilots. Just like with the last two games, I love the banter that Sly and Bentley share on the Battery-Cam. Bentley goes from being stoked and confident about this plan for this mission to terrified because of his conversation with Sly. These two are always poking fun at each other, and it's an endearing dynamic. Bentley must first drug the wolf by using some powered-up sleep darts, and he has to get in close to hit his target. Putting the player up close and personal with the danger makes this part of the mission a lot more tense than most other things in the game, especially considering that the wolf can dish out a lot of damage if you take a hit. You have to get in your shot and get the heck out of there. Once the wolf is sedated, the Guru takes over and has to wipe out 15 guards. This part of the mission serves as a power trip as the wolf is capable of scaling great heights with his jump and dispatching guards with just a single hit. We're almost halfway through this game now, and I think it was smart to include a moment like this where the player feels unstoppable given how much time you spend sneaking around normally in other missions. Because of this, Giant Wolf Massacre ends up being a great mission. In order to complete our next task, we're going to need a power-up, but more on those later. For now, we're purchasing the paraglider for Sly so that he can use it in the final mission, as well as the afterburners for Bentley so that he can quadruple jump. It's here where Bentley's famous hacking missions make their return, and just like many of the other returning features, it's been enhanced but not reimagined, which is fine. You still play as a little tank in a twin-stick shooter level where you must take out enemies and reach the end destination point. Honor Among Thieves includes a few new additions to the hacking minigame, including ball locks that the player must open by transporting spheres, as well as dark holes that will suck the player in, and a few new enemy types to consider. Hacking computer terminals was already one of the most enjoyable bits of Band of Thieves, and so I'm glad they didn't change things up too drastically here. Opting to sprinkle in a couple of new features ended up being the right choice in my opinion. The look has also been cleaned up and given a shiny gloss over it to improve the aesthetic of these sections. This is a gameplay mechanic that I wish had more appearances in Honor Among Thieves, and it makes me resent some of the new features just a little bit extra. Our final task in Holland sees us preparing to win the Aces Flight competition. In order to ensure their victory, the Cooper gang must first address the Black Baron's cheating past. He's been known to bring in support blimps to destroy the competition in the finals. During Windmill Firewall, Bentley discovers a glitch that allows him to throw the windmill propellers like kunai. In order to utilize this, Sly must first use his new paraglider to reach the 4 blimps and place tracking devices on them so that Bentley doesn't miss his shots. This section reminds me heavily of the end of Band of Thieves, where you had to reach Croc. You have to glide between objects, but they can make pretty drastic turns quickly, which can leave you falling to your death and having to restart. And these blimps have the same issue, but with a bit of patience, they can be conquered. Next up, Murray must use his raft to break the support beams holding up the Baron's communication array. You have to quickly row backwards while avoiding all the falling debris from the third place dogfight. I love that the Cooper gang pulls these jobs off while being hidden in plain sight due to the other dogfight. It's a nice little piece of atmosphere building. With that, it comes down to beating the Black Baron at altitude. He doesn't get a waypoint marker to indicate his location. Instead, his ship gets its own unique model and has a set of lights on it to naturally show the player where he's at without having to use a HUD element, and that's a thoughtful inclusion. You pretty much just hammer him with bullets until his health hits 0. It's at this point where he will call in the blimps and Bentley will take them out. This has never happened to me before, but I did catch this funny little glitch where this plane seems to be just stuck on this windmill. With his plane in shambles, the Baron must retreat to a commercial airliner where he and Sly duke it out on the wing to see who the victor will be. It's a pretty cool locale for a fight, even if it is a little unbelievable. Much like in Band of Thieves, the boss fights in this title aren't anything too spectacular when compared to other games, but they are definitely improved in this third game. Each boss has roughly 3 ways to damage you instead of the 1 or 2 that bosses had in the previous game. The Baron will also send guards after you, but you can also just cheese them by smacking them off the plane as they walk out. Out of all the boss fights in the game, I'd probably put this one somewhere in the middle. It's just average. But as the fight concludes, the plot twist I mentioned earlier is revealed. Penelope has been the Black Baron all along. And I almost wrote Bentley there instead of Penelope. Now that would have been a plot twist. Mistakes in writing aside, I'm not sure how I feel about this twist. As a kid, I of course thought it was mind-blowing, but my adult brain can't help but to view it as kinda stupid. Before I tell you why, I should remind you that this is a game targeting children and young adults, but still. If Penelope has been the Black Baron the entire time, that means she's condoned beating contestants to within an inch of their life, as well as cheating to win prior competitions. And before her identity is revealed, she even seems content in killing Sly just to win the competition. So yeah, the Baron does some pretty questionable stuff, and you can't really view him as a good person. But now we're being told it was Penelope all along, and she gives up the whole charade literally the second she's discovered. She's spent years and years building up this persona and becoming a champion at dogfighting, but the second she's discovered, she throws it all to the wind and joins your gang. I mean, she just tried to kill Sly, so do we even want her on the team? I guess what I'm trying to say is the character does a complete 180, and she just comes off as untrustworthy at best and dangerous at worst. The one thing I do love about this outro cutscene though is that it begins Bentley's character arc for this game. I mentioned at the start how this game is more character driven, unlike the plot driven nature of the previous game. We've already seen Murray's arc unfold in the first 2 chapters, and now it's Bentley's turn. He and Penelope clearly had a flirty vibe, but seeing each other in person reveals that they both weren't truthful in describing their looks. Penelope in particular seems completely uninterested in Bentley, and instead turns her eyes towards the toned physique of Sly. We also see Bentley looking bummed out on this tour of Holland. It begins sowing the seeds for his development. Bentley had high hopes for something serious with Penelope, and now he's just being thrown to the wayside in favor of Sly, which triggers some jealousy within him. It's a situation to keep monitor of as the next few chapters unfold. A Cold Alliance is perhaps the most eventful of the episodes in this game, and while it's not my personal favorite, I do respect the hell out of it because of how many impactful moments they were able to stuff into just one chapter. The focus here is on recruiting the Panda King, a former member of the Fiendish Five, and a man who was partially responsible for the death of Sly's parents. Bentley recognizes that his own demolition skills won't cut it, and the former foe seems to be their best bet. Sly is adamant that he won't allow that monster to join his team, but Bentley persuades him to at least visit the Panda King and talk. The first job in this chapter is unlike any other across the series, as we're placed in a unique one-off environment and tasked with finding a way to get the team up to the Panda King. The dialogue between the gang here sets up a lot for this chapter as well as the next. First, Penelope's crush on Sly is made obvious to the player, as well as Bentley's jealousy. Second, Sly is ultra defensive towards the Panda King and doesn't want to allow him to join their ranks. And third, Murray mentions the team van and how much he misses it. These are all plot points that will be explored throughout this chapter and the next. For now, the gang must get up to the Panda King to chat with him. Bentley devises a plan that requires all 5 team members' skills, and I love that. First, Murray must bounce up to the platform using his ball technique. Then, Penelope must use her RC car to make a path for Sly so that he can use his ninja spire jump to reach the next platform. From there, Bentley must use his sleep darts to fire up some pinwheels, and finally, the Guru must take control over a guard to reach some rockets to clear a path for the rest of the gang. It's a really well-designed level because every character gets a moment to shine. All of their skill sets are critical in completing this task, and it emphasizes the worth of each team member. It's very well executed in my opinion. But it's not over yet. After reaching the Panda King, the Guru bridges his mind with Sly's so that the two can communicate. The Panda King is in a deep trance, and we learn that he's fixated on the moment that he lost to Sly. This is an awesome callback moment to the first game that will give fans of the series a wide grin. The Panda King repeats his dialogue from the original encounter, and Sly tries to snap him out of it and figure out what's going on. But then he remembers what's coming next, a series of flame-inspired kung fu moves. You actually get to repeat the encounter from the first game, and you might have to hit him a couple times if you can't pick the correct dialogue option right away. Eventually, Sly is able to break through to the broken man when he says that they can't change their past, but that they can meet each other as the men they are today and try to make peace. The Panda King agrees and the mission ends, but it gives us a good insight into the mindset of this recruit. He's been a broken man, unable to escape his past failures, including his loss to Sly, and more recently, his failure to protect his daughter Jing King from a rival warlord named General Tsao. And yes, General Tsao is a chicken. He's a chicken. His name is General Tsao. Let's just get that out there, get it over with, get your laughs in now, and let's move on. The Panda King agrees to join our team solely for the Cooper Vault job as a favor if we help him save his daughter. So with that, the team gets started on rescuing the descendant of a man partially responsible for the killing of Sly's parents. Our first task is to get some inside information by establishing a mole. Bentley approaches General Tsao about being a wedding coordinator, but this is a fake out. You will be playing as Sly in this mission and collecting a sample of photographs in order to get hired on as a wedding photographer. It's one of the few jobs involving camera work in the game, but it's good to see it being used here. There's nothing too difficult about it. You don a disguise just like you did back in episode 1, you approach a guard, repeat the password, and then you're set. Just snap the photo. The first photo has no fail state, the second makes you wait for a nice pose, and the third sees you taking out an annoying photobomber. In fact, this game came out before photobombing was a thing, so this might be the first confirmed photobomber of all time. If you take nothing else from this video, at least you learned something. Really, this mission is about establishing the arrogance of General Tsao. His dialogue makes it clear that he thinks highly of himself, and he achieves his inflated ego by putting other people around him down. Out of all the villains in the game, Tsao is the easiest to dislike. He's got such an annoying smugness about him that you can't wait to knock his block off as soon as possible. Our next job provides a joyous moment for Murray, but before we get to that, I wanted to talk briefly about the graphics of Sly-tly. I must admit, so far in this series, I've only considered the graphics of the games based on the remasters, not the originals. From what I can recall though, I remember Sly-2 on PS2 feeling chunkier than its successor. Sly-2 had more of a claymation feeling to it, while Sly-3 looked closer to the remasters than either of the two other original games. Here though, in the remaster collection, everything is kept pretty uniform graphically, with subtle tweaks to the art style and character design making up the differences. The change between Sly-2 and Sly-3 is pretty minute, and so, once again, a lot of my thoughts on it have already been stated in the previous video. In my personal opinion, I still like the look of Band of Thieves more than Honor Among Thieves, and I think that's in part due to the extra development time that the second game had versus the third. The art style remains a blend of cartoon action with a few comic book elements weaved in for good measure. Where the games seem most different is how willing the third game is to put you in well-lit environments versus the previous. Sly-2 bathed you in moonlight throughout the experience, and while some levels were darker than others, overall the thiefy vibes were enhanced by the fact that it was always being played during nighttime. Sly-3 on the other hand isn't afraid to put the gang out in the field in broad daylight, and that's something that never really stuck well with me. It just doesn't fit into my viewpoints on being a thief, but that's certainly subjective. I wish I had more to say about the game's graphics, but really I've either stated it already or I'd be grasping at straws to come up with anything else. I love the art style, but just like in the previous game, it is starting to show its age. So let's move on. This job is about rescuing the team van after Penelope locates it floating around in the nearby waters. Murray is obviously ecstatic to see his pride and joy. Fans of the series will no doubt recall how heartbroken he was when the van floated away at the end of episode 7 in Sly-tly. We never got a resolution to that moment in that game, but we finally get it here, and it's a touching moment. We have to use Penelope's RC chopper to first guide the van over to Murray, and then protect him from guards as he drags it all the way back to the safe house. It's admirable seeing how dedicated Murray is to making sure the van doesn't get left behind again. He seriously has some of the best bits of dialogue in this segment.
It's no use, Murray. This area is too dangerous. We have to recover the van later.
But I can't lose her again!
Forget the van. You'll never make it.
But no! No! Either help me or get out of my way! I'm bringing her home!
This level was always personally infamous to me from a gameplay perspective though, and that's because you must use a turret to protect Murray in the final third of the mission. The turret sections in Sly-tly were atrocious, and it's actually improved here, but it can still be pretty challenging. There's such a small window to place shots in to take out guards while avoiding hitting Murray, and it's a massive pain in the ass. I failed this mission 3 or 4 times, and have always struggled with this part throughout every playthrough. That was, of course, until I realized that you could zoom in using the turret. I will say that the turret here isn't nearly as stiff to move as it was in the previous game, making it a much better experience. I just wish that they had told you directly in dialogue that you could zoom in. There's so many instances where characters break the fourth wall and will verbally tell you how to maneuver or control something, and I wish they had done that here because it's a real pain if you don't realize that you can do that. But yeah, I do love this mission from a character perspective. Murray really shines in this job, and Penelope and the Panda King play off it wonderfully. The next task will require us to use a power-up to complete, and so I wanted to share some quick thoughts on their inclusion this time around. The power-ups in Sly-tly work the same way they did in the previous game. You can use coins to buy them on the ThiefNet computer. Some of the power-ups returned from the previous game, and no, this isn't one of those games where the developers carried over abilities from one game to the next, like for example in Crash 3 Warped. You must buy all the returning ones again, and that never stuck well with me. Also, some of the power-ups have been reallocated to different characters than in the previous game, and I guess that's fine, if not a bit jarring. I can't recall if this move was in the previous game or not, but Murray gets a power-up called Temporal Lock that momentarily freezes all the guards in place. I don't understand why it's given to Murray though. He's more than capable of handling guards in combat. Why would he ever need to skip out on fighting them? I just don't get it. The newest addition that stands out the most would be the tiered attack moves that Sly gains access to. He can now do an uppercut, a push, and a spin move that all can be leveled up at the cost of more coins. The last stage of these moves are one-hit KOs, so I can't call them completely useless. Still, the power-ups remain an afterthought on most playthroughs because they aren't very useful most of the time. In almost any combat encounter, your best bet is to run away, save for playing as Murray, where you can just spam your way out of it. So they're not really that useful. At the very least, the power-ups do provide some ways to experiment for dedicated fans who are really loving the game and want to play around in these worlds more, but that's about it. The power-up we need in this job is a Grapple-Cam, easily Bentley's most impactful new inclusion. I hesitate to call it an equivalent to Murray's ball form since it comes so late into the game, but it's basically that. Before we use it though, Sly and Bentley must team up to steal a couple of keys, and I'd be remiss to not mention that, once again, I hate that Bentley and Murray are able to pickpocket in this game. It just doesn't fit with their playstyles. So the Grapple-Cam can be used to distract or lure guards, and also includes a useless self-destruct feature. In this case, we must use it to lower a set of door lasers so that Bentley can pass through. It is fun to mess around with this thing because it can reach places that the characters can't. I remember exploring a lot of the maps using the Grapple-Cam when I was a youngster. By far though, the thing I love most is that Bentley can call out insults on it, which are always funny to hear.
You ugly! Yo mama! Eat dirt! I'm yelling at you! Hey, pay attention to me! You're a bad person. I need it! Up your nose with a rubber hose!
In this job, Bentley uses the cam to lure some guards onto pressure pads so that he can sleep dart them to clear a path up to the security computer. From there, he's able to hack into Sal's wedding information to try to gather more info. What happens next is an unexpected moment that may surprise the player on a first playthrough, but it really makes no sense if you think about it too much. Bentley is giving his standard presentation for the next set of jobs. Typically, this is a safe moment, where the player feels right in the thick of things as Bentley breaks down what the gang must do. Here though, the presentation is quickly interrupted when Bentley realizes his computer has been stolen and that Sal is the culprit. Bentley, normally steadfast during these presentations, is thrown way off kilter and Sly must improv a plan to get the computer back. It's a cool moment. But it's only ruined when you start to think about where these pictures came from. I mean, the PowerPoint doesn't really skip a beat, as if the slides fully anticipated Sal's intrusion. It just seems bizarre, and I think it would have been better if it transitioned into an in-game cutscene instead of what we got here. Regardless, it becomes evident that we need to retrieve the computer. In order to do this, Bentley must first break into Sal's home to search his personal computer for any files that may lead to a tip. This is the last time we'll get to play the hacking minigame throughout the campaign, so it was smart to send this mechanic off with a boss encounter. Sal has this massive defense avatar that will easily be the trickiest thing the player ever has to face during these minigame levels. It pulls you in with a black hole effect, it has a massive number of shields, and it can also shoot out projectiles. It does go down eventually, but they do send this mechanic off right. From there, Sly must traverse the open skies with a little help from the Guru. I always thought this was one of the coolest sections, as you get to use just about everything from the natural environment as platforms, including guards. I mean, there's nothing like using a monkey guard's pointy head as a landing spot for a ninja spire jump. This short section ends up being a smart way of tying the Guru back into the gameplay, so it's appreciated. But what really shines in this mission is the boss encounter with Sal. It's done in two parts, and if there was any doubt about this character before, he outs himself as a completely terrible person when he admits that his marriage to Jin King is forced and that he views her simply as a stepping stone. He's easily the biggest asshole the Cooper gang has ever come up against, and it really incentivizes you in beating the crap out of him. In order to do this, you first must get a couple hits on him high above the tree line. I love the location of this fight, by the way. It's one of the prettiest vistas the series has to offer, and it's dripping with atmosphere. I also enjoy this fight because it ends up being one of the most difficult encounters across the series, on top of being very cinematic. In the first stage, Sal will shoot projectiles at you and attempt to cut you down with a shield bash. This section has no gravity though, so when Sly leaps, he zips across the battleground horizontally and can change direction with his double jump. It ends up being a tough battle disguised as a graceful dance. Eventually, you knock Sal to the ground floor where the second battle begins. This encounter is a straight up fistfight, no gimmicks to slow it down. Sal comes at you with everything he's got, including a shield bash, a defensive spin, and 2 black magic attacks, including the Hands of the Dead reaching up to grab you, as well as dragon heads coming after you. The environment here is full of bamboo stalks for you to climb, and they interact well with Sal's attacks. You can gain a momentary reprieve from climbing them, but he's able to cut them down, as well as send dragon heads up the stalks to get you, forcing you to descend. However, climbing to a greater height also despawns the Grave Hand attack, so you can't completely ignore them. It's a nice way of adding a little variety to the fight without it feeling like a one-off gimmick. But I will admit that the fight can be trivialized if you just stay super aggressive and keep getting hits on Sal. I'll end this section by saying this. The fight with Sal has atmosphere, it has stakes, and it actually lets you use the fighting mechanics that you're familiar with instead of shoehorning in something else, making this a top boss fight across the entire series. I mentioned when I was fighting the Black Baron that the boss encounters in this game were better than the previous game, and now that I'm reflecting more on that, I'm realizing that they are actually dramatically better in most cases. Our next job sees us playing as the Panda King in all of his glory for the first time. To be honest, you only get to play as him twice throughout the game, in this mission and once in the next chapter. It's an unfortunate reality of introducing playable characters so late into the experience. They won't get a lot of time to shine on their own, while also robbing established characters of their playtime. It's another issue that factors back into my biggest complaint about Sly-tly, its unfocused gameplay. I want to give this job some props on how it characterizes the fireworks expert. Bentley makes it clear that he's sticking out his neck to try to recruit him, given his past encounters with Sly. The Panda King is ticked off by this comment, but restrains himself before committing to helping Sly. We get this awesome moment where the Panda King is forced to face his more violent self. This past version of himself still lingers in his mind, and it's unclear to the man what the right path is. He feels like the path of humility has brought him a lot of peace following his first loss to Sly, but consequentially, he feels helpless in this mindset because it cost him his daughter. His mind is torn between the new path he walks versus the power that came with being his former self. He's only able to draw up the courage to help Sly by recognizing that both components of his personality are needed in raising his daughter. And at this point, cooperating with Sly is the best chance he has of saving his daughter. Given that we've had 2.5 games to adore Sly, it was smart for the developers to include this scene that humanizes the Panda King to temper our disdain for him due to how he hurt Sly. It doesn't stop there though. This mission truly makes Sly feel like the outsider, as it's one of the only times in the series in which we see him move around the game world free of our control. Sly feels like the outsider here as we lumber along as the giant panda. In this way, we connect with the Panda King more. After witnessing how much conflict the Panda King has experienced over working with Sly, it makes a line like this all the more impactful.
We're making a pretty good team. This is the last of the fireworks. Put them in the crypt and kaboom! No more hopping vampires.
Yes, this ordinance will suffice.
They're gonna be fangs everywhere! Right. I'll just head back to the safe house.
Yes, do that.
We understand why the Panda King is so cold towards Sly, but also that he's doing his best to work with the man that he feels cost him everything. He's willing to work with Sly, but he's not going to stand there and banter with him. I'd call it a pretty powerful character insight, given the fact that this all comes within one mission. In terms of gameplay, the Panda King moves very slowly when compared to the other characters, but he more than makes up for it due to his ranged attacks. The Panda King can single jump and use a melee strike to one-hit guards, but his true force is felt in his fireworks. As a quick note, the enemies in this level explode on death, meaning a melee attack will damage you. It's a good way of forcing the player into using the fireworks and having the intended experience. He's able to jam-pack a launcher with up to 10 fireworks and target enemies and items within the environment before launching the missiles to destroy them. There's some versatility to it as well, as you can choose to launch any amount of rockets at any time instead of having to load all the way up to 10 every single time. But you can't just sit there and constantly load up to 10 rockets and just wait for an enemy to come along, because they will detonate within the launcher, causing damage to you. Enemies also move faster than you, which means you'll constantly have to juggle moving around the environment while swinging around the camera to lock onto enemies before blowing them sky high. Frantic is the best word to describe his gameplay style, but it also comes with a sense of power given how capable the Panda King is of dispatching large amounts of foes quickly. To me, he ends up being the best new character to play as because they struck a good balance with his design. Ultimately, I just wish we got more time to play as him. Our next job sees us rescuing Murray by controlling Penelope's RC car. Penelope is the only team member who doesn't become playable as herself throughout the campaign, except in one minor instance. Instead, you take control of RC vehicles whenever her skill set is called upon. I've already talked about her RC chopper sections, but I guess I'll spend some time discussing the RC car here. I like the chopper a lot more than the RC car simply because the car is constantly getting hung up on things in the environment. It sucks in this job because it's set up as a race, and when you get caught up on something, it feels like the level design's fault, not yours. The best thing about the car is that every time they use it, it has something new done to it so that you aren't repeating the same things with it over and over again. What's crazy to me is that this RC car actually gets more missions than does the Panda King, which I think is a shame. I don't have much more to say about Penelope gameplay other than that. Like I said before, she's mostly just a character whose impact is on the plot, not the gameplay. The next job is one of the more underrated ones in the game, if you ask me. Bentley realizes that in order to escape the mountains with Sal's loot, the van is going to need a new fully charged battery. After stealing it out of a power coupling, he whispers to Sly about how to get it charged up. The perspective quickly switches to Carmelita though, as we get to play on the opposite side of cops and robbers for the first time. After 2.5 games of being chased by Carmelita while playing as Sly, it's cool to give us the opportunity to see things from the other's perspective. It gives us a more well-rounded understanding of the dynamic between the two, and Sly makes for the most agile adversary we've faced as Carmelita so far. It's a win-win if you ask me. After zapping Sly a bunch of times, it's revealed that he was just acting and Carmelita's shocks were being used to charge the battery. From there, Sly must avoid a constant chase from Carmelita while dropping off the battery a couple of times to finish preparing it. And I always loved going back up to the highest point in this level and using the paraglider to cheese the final part of this job. I mean, by the time Carmelita runs down and reaches you, the mission is over. It makes me feel like I'm getting a 1-up on the game, and I like that. Alright. Operation Wedding Crasher is the most try-hard operation the series ever came up with, and if it wasn't clear from that, I'm not a big fan of it. When I was younger, this mission was the bane of my existence, as my young mind and hands struggled to overcome it. Okay, yes, I was 12 at the time, you can shut up, I was young enough to justify that point. Wedding Crasher is one of the longest sequences in the game, as you will be switching between two groups to accomplish everything. On one hand, Bentley, Penelope, and Murray are working together to rob Sal's treasure palace while Sly, the Guru, and the Panda King all work to rescue Jing King. You start with the first group, as Penelope must use her RC car to reach a computer terminal in the treasure palace to shut down security. Before you get started, there's another line displaying Penelope's affection for Sly, but it quickly transitions into controlling the RC car. You must navigate around blue security nodes and not cross the beams or else the alarm will raise and you'll fail the job. You haven't had a ton of time to practice with the RC car, and demanding extra precision may be a little bit of a reach. Still, it's something you can get through after a couple of attempts. One thing I really appreciated about this mission, back when I was a kid, is that it allows you then to take out all the frustration you had by smashing up all the security nodes. It's really one of those things that can go either way. You might view it as the game wasting your time by forcing you to navigate through them only to have you blow them up. But on the other hand, it may be that cathartic relief I referenced a moment ago. With the nodes destroyed, Penelope and Murray must use a double button switch to open up the secret door. By the way, I've played this game a bunch of times, but this was the first time that I realized that this dragon statue right here is the dragon you fight later in the level. I also find it humorous that the game spawns in 2 basic dragon head enemies that die in one hit just to give Murray something to do here. That's hilarious. It's such a weird little inclusion. With that, Murray and Penelope leap into the treasure trove, but this causes the building to shake. We then flash back a few moments when Sly left. We reach the palace and come face to face with my least favorite part of this entire game. So apparently these vases act as an alarm system to detect subterranean attacks on the palace. Now, I'm not sure how many times this palace was ransacked using subterranean warfare, but it must have been a whole hell of a lot of times to install a security system specifically focused on stopping it. I mean, come on. And it's kind of weird how they didn't do jack shit when I smashed them up in the laptop retrieval mission, but yeah, we move on. Sly and the player must prevent vases from falling over as they begin to tip. Only one vase falls at a time at first, but soon more and more begin to tumble in quick succession. I failed this section of the job a lot as a youngster, and it subconsciously built a sense of dread in me about this entire mission ever since. As an adult, it just seems like a strange and contrived gameplay situation. It feels totally unrealistic considering only one vase falls at a time when you'd expect them all to come crashing down if the impact of the rockets was that serious. I just don't get it, but luckily I got through it without a job failed screen. We then cut back outside to Bentley where he uses his Grapple-Cam to lure Carmelita to the palace so that she can take the Cooper gang's bait. I think it's a massive leap in logic to assume that Carmelita would overhear Sly's fake plan and decide to disguise herself as Jing King instead of just going after him here and now. This is doubly true when you consider all the commotion going on in the following set of scenes. And as a quick note, this is the final time the game will have these 2 characters in the same area until she ends up rescuing him at the beginning of the final chapter. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but her motivation to save him has a romantic undertone to it, and it hasn't really been established for her in any of the scenes leading up to that encounter. I think they could have done a better job of emphasizing the romance and the actual connection between Sly and Carmelita before we reach that final chapter. We cut back to the outside where Sao is approaching his temple as it collapses into the water below. We get this weird slow motion sequence as if the game thinks it's an action title for a few seconds. They wanted to make this one of the flashiest scenes of the game, but I don't think enough was put into it to make it look right. For instance, Sao is standing at the top of the temple in this scene, and then it shows him running up the ramp in the next. Then he summons the dragon, and it just kinda spawns out of nowhere, and it looks absolutely dreadful. This thing looked awful in 2005, and it's aged like the dinosaurs. It's easily the most hideous thing in the original trilogy. The appearance of this ugly beast also ensures that any chance of another epic showdown with Sao is completely erased. I was really hoping to get another shot at that guy after how cool the first fight was, but instead, we're stuck with this weird ugly dragon. You must launch yourself up to his location using fireworks, and then you have to platform up to his head to get some shots in. After a while, he will channel his inner Peppy and do a barrel roll to knock you off. Now, I'm convinced that there's a way to stay up here without falling, but I've never pulled it off successfully. You just hit the dragon a couple of times, and then you save Penelope. The dragon kind of appears to freeze in midair so that they can have this conversation, by the way. So yeah, there's just too many visual hiccups in this sequence for my liking. But with that, the gang escapes. Sao is caught by Carmelita the next day after the general failed to realize his would-be bride had escaped. The Panda King pledges to help the gang with the Cooper Vault job and promises to return to his daughter once it's all said and done. Really though, I think the ending of this chapter fails to utilize Sal, because he's so uninvolved during this entire sequence. I mean, yeah, we see him, but there's hardly any interaction between him and our characters during this scene, and there's no gameplay interactions whatsoever. He's such a memorable boss solely on the grounds of being a complete asshole, one of the easiest villains to hate throughout the entire series. They do such a good job at portraying his smugness and his arrogance, but they never give the player an opportunity to truly alleviate their hatred towards this character. Sure, you get to fight him as Sly, but it ends in a draw. And when I think about the fact that Bentley doesn't get his own boss fight in this game, I think him taking down Sal would have been fantastic. Sal would have believed himself superior in every way to the handicapped turtle, and having Bentley defeat him would be all the more satisfying because of it. And maybe this could have caught the eye of Penelope, making her change in affection in the next chapter feel a tad more earned. Dead Men Tell No Tales is easily the most controversial episode of the game, and maybe even the original trilogy. It starts off with the traditional mission structure you've come to know and love, but forsakes it during the second half of the chapter to set sail on the open seas. Before we get to that though, we must understand why we're here. Dimitri has called in that favor back from chapter 3, and has tasked the Cooper gang with helping him recover his grandfather's stolen scuba equipment. I love the setup for this chapter. It feels like a natural step because they took the time to set up its inclusion using Dimitri in an earlier chapter. A favor for a favor even rings true in the world of thieving. I also appreciate that this opening cinematic teases us by referencing a pirate named Black Spot Pete, making us think he will be the chapter's antagonist, only to switch things up in its first job. Speaking of that first job, it's all about Sly trying to gather intel by communicating with Black Spot Pete. The discussion soon reveals Pete to be a pretty tight-lipped man. He refuses to talk treasure with anyone who isn't a pirate, and only prefers to do so with his former shipmate, Cantankerous Tim. Given that this job culminates in a swearing match between Sly and Pete, I figured now would be a good time to share my thoughts on the game's voice acting. In the Sly-2 video, I mentioned that each cast member gave a better performance than they had in the original game. The more animated performances allowed each character to feel more alive than they had before. The biggest improvement came from Kevin Miller's Sly, but unfortunately I can't offer that same praise for Sly-3. There are far too many times throughout this game where his voice work sounds completely flat, as if Sly is completely uninterested or unengaged with what is happening to him or around him.
There he is, Black Spot Pete.
I didn't think pirates could get that old. Thought scurvy would get them or something. We got a situation here, fellas. Looks like Carmelita finally managed to catch up.
Nice work. With this second key in my Grapple-Cam, I'm all set up for the inner office.
Sure you won't need my help on the inside?
He reins things back in for the game's final chapter and ends on a strong note, but there's bits and pieces throughout the first 85% of the game that sounds uninspired. Matt Olson's Bentley and Chris Murphy's Murray continue to be rock solid, with Matt Olson continuing his excellence at playing this character perfectly. The sometimes inferior writing, though, does bring it down just a peg. As a whole, I do have to say the voice work of Sly-3 is better than that of Sly-2, despite Miller's inferior work, and that's because the cast of supporting characters is handled so much better. The villains of Sly-2, outside of Dimitri, didn't really sell their characters as much as I would have hoped. They were more grounded, and it ended up feeling samey across the roster of bad guys. Here though, Octavio, the Black Baron, Sal, Lafouille, and Dr. M are all performed wonderfully and really convey a sense of intimidation within their work. Each of them feels like a true threat, and one reason for that is because of how well their voice work is handled. Despite the constant feeling of danger, their portrayals are all varied, whether it's Octavio's thick Italian accent, Sal's smug and grandiose attitude, or Dr. M's calm but impactful dialogue. Voice acting for the series is at its best in Sly-3. It's just a shame that the titular character has his portrayal lessened by work that didn't live up to the previous game. Anyway, back to this job, and I'm blown away by how much I struggled with it. It just seems like everything that could have gone wrong did indeed go wrong on this playthrough. First, Stone Jake, notorious for his weird feelings towards monkeys, caught me red-handed, chased me down, and ended up getting stuck. I eventually freed him, but he wouldn't return back to the island, so I had to let him kill me. Eventually, I got him, and I earned this thing. You're telling me that's an eye patch? Wow, not their best work. I also struggled with the peg leg dude whose entourage kept catching me and refusing to die. And once they were gone, the dude just kept sitting down while I was pickpocketing him. I kept walking into him and getting caught. I didn't feel like I was playing sloppy, it just felt like a run of bad luck. It was just so bizarre. I've never experienced anything like this in this mission before. I just struggled with it so much and I felt compelled to share. The mission culminates with a swear-off between a disguised Sly and Black Spot Pete, where you have to insult each other without repeating a jab. This is perhaps the best implementation of the dialogue mechanic because there is an actual consequence for picking the wrong option, and the only other time that's true is when you fight the Panda King back in Chapter 4. I like this section. It's fun to mix and match insults and hurl them at this old man. Eventually, Pete reveals that his treasure map leading to Remy's scuba gear was lost to a pirate named Captain Lafouille, aka the smartest man on the 7 seas. With that, the gang begins plotting on how to recover the goods. Originally, I planned to talk about Bentley's gameplay during this mission, but looking back, I've already covered most of his new additions. His bombs and sleep darts returned from the previous game, and they are hardly, if ever, necessary to use throughout the game. He also still handles the hacking and planning for the team, but the handling of the RC vehicles has been forfeited to Penelope. I've also already mentioned that he's gained the ability to pickpocket, but doing so with him is terrible because of how slow it is. His biggest new addition to gameplay is the Grapple-Cam missions, but there's only a few of them throughout the game, and it's introduced past the halfway point. So taking all of these factors into consideration, it becomes clear that Bentley got the short end of the stick this time around and hasn't been given a whole lot of new gameplay mechanics and has had existing ones stripped away to justify Penelope's inclusion. I'm not sure if the developers felt like they could get away with cutting back on Bentley's usage, given that the player still interacts with him a lot in the Binocucom conversations, but it's become clear to me in this playthrough that he's underutilized. I'll do a breakdown of how many missions each character gets to themselves later on, but suffice it to say that it feels like Murray and Bentley's usage has been swapped when compared to Band of Thieves. Sly still dominates the most amount of solo missions, but Bentley takes a backseat to Murray even in missions involving multiple characters. I would have liked to see all 3 main characters get a boost to their gameplay in this final game. However, I have to call it as it is. Sly's gameplay remains about the same, Murray's has been improved, and Bentley's has been kinda stripped down. That being said though, Dynamic Duo is one of my favorite Bentley missions in the game, although it is more of a mission involving multiple characters. This mission aims to accomplish a lot. It includes RC car gameplay, alongside of Grapple-Cam gameplay, and also makes some time for combat involving Bentley of all people. It also plays a vital role in shifting Penelope's affection from Sly towards Bentley, while also establishing Lafouille as a threat. It all starts with Bentley muttering to himself about hating that all the girls go after Sly instead of him. I guess this is somewhat true, although Neela and Carmelita make for a very small sample size, not to mention that the former was just using him. But anyway, it's clear that Bentley remains jealous of Sly and is interested in Penelope. The gameplay starts with us having to retrieve pieces of a glorified metal detector, but we can only do so using the RC car. This is the best implementation of the car throughout the game because we're free to use it in the hub world without a timer or any real restrictions. It's satisfying to take out unsuspecting guards with the turret or race past them on your way to the next machine piece. You're just given a lot of freedom here to use it how you see fit, and I think that elevates the experience. After we get all the pieces, the two head out for Lafui's keep, and we get this interaction between the two where Penelope begins to understand Bentley better. Bentley tries to talk himself up and downplay Sly's role, but Penelope counters by saying both of them are good at what they do. It opens up Penelope's mind a bit and forces her to realize that she has more in common with Bentley than she does with Sly. It's good to establish this here because ultimately the two end up together because Bentley saves her life. It feels straight out of a bad romantic movie. At least establishing their connection through a shared passion for technology lessens the blow of Penelope just falling in love because she got rescued. Okay, I'm almost certainly overanalyzing with that one. Regardless, I think it's a necessary scene because Bentley is forced to acknowledge his limitations as well as his strengths. From there, you bust into the keep and find Lafui. He kills off his first mate just for disagreeing with him, and that's about all you need to see to understand what kind of man he is. Having power isn't enough. He needs to make sure everyone else knows it. He retreats to his chambers, and Bentley must take out 5 guards using whatever means necessary. I like this section, it really flips your expectations. The series has always given these combat sections to Murray, and even Sly from time to time, but never Bentley, until now, and I like that. Penelope is able to get the safe unlocked to grab up the map leading to the scuba gear, but she's also temporarily blinded in the process. Bentley must use his Grapple-Cam to guide her back to the safe house. This is supposed to be a heroic moment, but I think it's lessened by the fact that he doesn't go after her himself. He just uses the Grapple-Cam to make awkward bird noises so that she can follow the sound back to the safe house. Of all the Grapple-Cam sections, this is easily the most forced. That aside, I think this is a great mission. It provides some variation while also furthering Bentley's character arc and introducing us to our next foe. Wrapping up my final comments on the presentation brings us to the music. It's last, but it's not least. In the previous 2 videos, I mentioned that I really enjoyed the music of Sly 1 more than its sequel. Peter McConnell, the composer of the Sly 2 soundtrack, returned to handle the music for this title, and I think this is his better work. The music of Sly 2 fit thematically for the darker, grittier story being told, but Sly 3 is a much more light-hearted adventure, and the music reflects that. The background music of Hub Worlds doesn't feel like filler that the player tunes out after a few minutes. It's constantly there, which may sound like a bad thing, but it really isn't. I gotta praise McConnell for continuing to use instruments from the locations that the levels are based on. I always thought that was a great touch, and it continues here. I also appreciate the little details, like how the music accompanying Bentley's hacking missions gets faster with each subsequent hack, which aligns with the increased difficulty. More frantic music for a more panicked situation. It's a great complement to the gameplay. And the final tracks of this game, taking place in the final chapter, always get me hyped to traverse the Cooper Vault and fight Dr. M. Anyway, music taste is always subjective, but for me, this is the second best soundtrack in the series, behind that of Sly 1. Jollyboat of Destruction sees Murray and Sly teaming up to deal with the Harbor Patrol, so that when they leave with the newly acquired treasure map, they won't be stopped. This is yet another vehicle mission, but it's one I don't really mind because the Jollyboat moves fluidly and rapidly throughout the open waters. You're not restricted like you are in so many other vehicle sections. You first must blow up the rudders on 4 different ships, and they're each protected by automatic cannons. Each subsequent ship gets an extra cannon protecting it, but honestly, the best approach is to just make a full assault on the rudder and get out of there. Next up, small ships crash the party and you have to take them out too. It would have been really easy to just have us shoot the cannon to sink each ship, but they made it a little bit more engaging by requiring the player to smash into each ship first. This apparently knocks the armor off of them, opening them up to an attack. I like it though, because it fits well in Demurray's character, and it's something we can easily see him doing, enjoying smashing up these ships. Finally, the Harbor Patrol sends their big guns, a cutter whose broadsides are filled with cannons. Taking this thing out forces the player to balance movement and firing. If the player stands still, the cutter will light them up and sink their ship. But if they're moving around forever, it's much harder to charge up and shoot off a cannonball. It requires the player to keep weaving out of the way before quickly lining up and firing a shot. It's a way of putting all the skills together in one final showdown, and it's good. And so I really enjoy the first 3 jobs of this chapter, but what comes next has never sat well with me. The remainder of this chapter's traversal will be done through sailing. After the gang commandeers a ship from the harbor, they set sail into open waters, leaving this awesome hub world behind. For many years, I've dreaded reaching this part of Sly-tly, because it doesn't align with the series' emphasis on stealth and platforming. Instead, it's just an extended vehicle section that eats up about an hour of the game's short runtime. The ship controls well enough, you simply press L2 or R2 to swing the ship's direction around while it's constantly sailing forward. The wind always blows in from the south, which you can use to your advantage to traverse quickly. To put it simply, the controls are actually pretty good. My issue just lies with how its implementation clashes with the series' ideals. And to be fair, you could argue that about the other vehicle sections within this very game. But the amount of time you spend in the ship compared to the other vehicles is much greater. The biggest killer though is how combat encounters within the ship can kill the pace of the game. I'll talk more about boat combat in one of the upcoming jobs, but the threat of encountering unnecessary fights lingers every time you set sail. There's nothing more frustrating in this game than having to dart around enemy ships to avoid combat encounters when you just want to reach the next mission marker. And when you get caught in the crossfires and are forced to fight, it's even more annoying. It becomes mandatory tedium that is so far removed from the core gameplay, and it eats up so much time on each subsequent playthrough. This mission isn't all bad though, as reaching Dagger Isle opens up a new mechanic, treasure maps, which can actually be brought back to previous hub worlds where you can find treasure in alternate challenges. Following a map to some buried loot feels like a very thiefy thing to do, and that justifies its inclusion. By the way, I've played this game probably, 25 times, and this was the first time I realized that you could knock out and silently obliterate these gators. I mean, Bentley calls them lizards, but yeah, that's a gator, bro. Hilariously, they function almost like guards in that they will chase you down and somehow throw rocks at you if you hide above them. Oh, and they can talk.
Island is home to some nearsighted lizards. They can't see very far ahead, but they'll bite you in half given a chance.
Aye! Island password! Quickly now!
Transmitting password.
Porthole, spar hole.
Sorry, shipmate!
I'll never view this game the same after seeing that. Anyway, the treasure map gives you clues to follow, which involves taking a certain number of paces after discovering what the hints are referencing in the overworld. This is all done live though, so guards and lizards, I guess, can still spot you and attack you if you aren't careful. Successfully solving a hint leads to an X spawning so that you don't lose progress if you're forced to fight. the treasure maps are quietly one of the game's better new inclusions. Dimitri is able to recover his grandfather's scuba gear, and just as things are wrapping up, Lafouille shows up and kidnaps Penelope. He tells the gang to retreat to their ship and that he's keeping Penelope as his prize. One factor that may sway Penelope's affection from Sly to Bentley is that Sly's line comes off as him sacrificing her to save the rest of the gang, but Bentley's reinforces the notion that they will save her.
We don't have any options here. Everyone back to the ship.
You can't just abandon me. Help! Please! I'm so scared.
Penelope, do what he says. Stay alive. We will save you.
I trust you.
Bentley has already done this once in the Dynamic Duo mission, and so when Penelope says she trusts him, it feels genuine. That's a touch I've always liked. With that though, we retreat back to the ship and prepare for our next set of jobs. Next up is one of the game's most iconic missions, Crusher from the Depths, where Sly and the Panda King team up to take down a legendary ocean creature. A giant squid strikes fear into Lafouille's men, and the Cooper gang reasons that learning its ways may help them in rescuing Penelope. This mission is a set piece, but it chugs the frame rate. Still, the action and intensity of the fight makes up for that to a degree. Crusher instantly destroys your ship's sails and later sets the boat on fire, but this damage is of course hand-waved away at the mission's conclusion, which never sat right with me. Seriously, they would have been so doomed, but I digress. This is the second and final time you'll play as the Panda King in the game, as he's the only new character who doesn't get a segment in the final chapter. At the very least, this is a memorable encounter. You'll constantly have to barrage Crusher's tentacles and weak spots using your fireworks while dodging his incoming attacks. There's a sense of spectacle to it that not many other jobs in this game can recreate. You'll cycle through 3 phases as Panda King, which provides a little bit of variety to the gameplay. At first you just shoot tentacles before they hit you, then you have to keep the ship upright by blasting tentacles so that they don't tip the ship over, and finally, you have to dodge tentacles and fireballs while pelting tentacles and the weak spot. None of the sections drag on for too long and provide a bit of action to the gameplay. Before wrapping things up, Sly takes the helm as the Panda King works on making more fireworks, although he never returns to use them, strangely enough. Sly must slap the tentacles to keep them stuck on the ship so that Crusher will come in close to pry them off. At this point, Sly fires the cannons directly into his eyeball, and after doing this 3 times, the mission is concluded. It was smart to include another mission where Sly and the Panda King team up, as overcoming a common enemy allows them to form a greater sense of trust. After more sailing, we reach our first of 2 Dimitri missions. Dimitri claims the title as the group's scuba master, and both of his missions take place underwater. The control setup is completely different than anything we've seen before. We use triangle, circle, square, and cross to move forward, right, left, and backwards, and holding down L1 will give a temporary boost that recharges quickly. Surprisingly, the controls have held up somewhat well, and I think that's due to the sense of speed it gives you. It doesn't feel restrictive because you can still jet through the water quickly. I only have 2 real issues with the Dimitri sections. The first is that all the action is framed within this HUD element that's supposed to act as a scuba mask. This doesn't accomplish the intended goal of making these sections feel more immersive, but instead makes them borderline nauseating. You're given such a small window to see out of that it's hard to tell what's around you, especially on a first playthrough when you're not familiar with this underwater level. I mean, all the spinning around and fast-paced movement was disorienting for me, and I'm someone that's experienced it plenty of times before. Restricting the player's vision here was not a good design choice and offers nothing of value while also obstructing too much of the environment. I'm also not big on how the game handles combat in these underwater sections. You're asked to defend yourself against sharks in this mission. In fact, killing 5 of them is the last mandatory thing you must do to complete it. But it seems like they can only be killed when they're coming at you head on. This is at least true for the hammerheads. This doesn't bother me as much as the restricted vision, but I just don't think it's needed. Let me sneak up on them and kill them. Don't force me to stupidly lure them right into me, especially when the gun takes a few seconds to reload. The second Dimitri mission is structured a bit different from this one, as you'll primarily be showing mastery over the controls as you quickly dodge incoming threats. Dimitri's gameplay is okay, I guess. It's another instance where I don't get why they spent time developing all these systems just for 2 missions when they could have went towards improving the gameplay we know and love. It's about time we discuss the pirate ship combat, and to be honest, it's not bad when the fights are necessary for progression. The goal of this mission is to sink 8 of Lafui's top ships so that they won't be able to help him during their assault on Bloodbath Bay. I can't confirm this for sure, but supposedly the blasting collars that you get in the previous job power up the cannons on your ship. I'm not sure if having them affects gameplay or not, but according to the dialogue, it does, and because of that, I always grab up those before I do this mission. In this job, you'll have to take on a series of pirate battles, first against 1 boat, then 3, and then 4. The boat's controls in battle remain the same as in the overworld. You steer using L2 and R2, and fire the cannons using circle. There's actually a decent amount of strategy considering there's only 3 button inputs. You'll be attempting to deal out as much damage as possible by lining up broadside hits, but of course, doing so will also make you susceptible to massive damage. The game does cheat in your favor though, as your cannonballs will hone in on a target and usually do the maximum damage. Essentially, every shot you fire is like a broadside shot if you've gotten enough distance for the cannonballs to centralize on the target. Still, when you're outnumbered so drastically, this is completely alright in my book. But it's not enough to just deal out damage, you also must dodge incoming damage because your ship is relatively weak. If a cannonball hits your ship, it'll spring a leak. Sly can stop the flooding by hitting the spots with his cane, but you can't recover health mid-fight. And this leads to these interesting moments where you'll try to shield one side of your ship if it has less health. And another cool thing is that your cannons can get blown clean off in a fight, leaving you with less firepower. It's a good way of incentivizing the player to balance offensive and defensive maneuvering. So, all in all, the ship combat can be pretty fun. I especially enjoy ramming a ship after blowing away its sails and capturing it for extra coins. Still, it's not something I want to spend too long doing in a Sly Cooper game. They make you sail around for the better part of an hour, and the game isn't very long. I was fortunate this time to not get caught up in any optional fights, but it is super frustrating when you do. I would have much rather preferred this being a one-off mission and have more content to complete in Bloodbath Bay, but it is what it is. Our final traditional operation of the game is about to unfold, and our primary objective is rescuing Penelope. It starts off with a very underwhelming fight against the Death Hen that took me less than 45 seconds to complete. Maybe I got lucky with my shots, but 2 rounds of cannon blast was all it took to take down this supposedly strong vessel. From there, Sly boards the ship and we get another go with the dialogue options mechanic. Again, there's no real punishment for choosing wrong, just the addition of new dialogue. Lafui's insecurity and ego is exposed before he reveals that Penelope is being kept in the Skull Keep. From there, Sly escapes with Murray and ventures to the tower housing Penelope, only to find it was a fake-out. Lafui is shown to be celebrating his victory after tricking the Cooper gang by making them think that they had tricked him. Bentley then lures Lafui into the open waters where the real plan begins to take fold. The Guru returns with Crusher and protects Bentley as he cracks open Penelope's prison cell. Meanwhile, the player is tasked with using Crusher's tentacles to keep the guards at bay. They will come from 4 directions, but the player only has 2 tentacles, so they must keep moving them back and forth. What makes this section a joke is the ability to spam Crusher's tentacles, which ensures that nobody ever gets close to Bentley as he works. On top of that, this is supposed to be some sort of action sequence, but nothing else is really moving around except the tentacles, so it ends up looking rather boring despite the good music. I have never been a fan of this little section. With Penelope free, Lafui makes one final push to dispose of the gang as he holds her hostage with a cutlass to her neck. Sly is revealed to be okay, but for some reason, the master of athleticism himself comes crashing in and knocks out Bentley as well as Lafouille. The villain quickly recovers, and Penelope is forced to defend Bentley in a sword fight. And this has got to be the worst boss fight in the game. You're thrown into this new sword fighting gameplay that you haven't had a chance to experience before. You're told to jump and duck under Lafouille's swings while hitting him high or low depending on how he blocks. All of this comes at you very fast, and it's quite easy to die before you even get a feel for what the controls are. Basically, you have to knock him down 3 rungs before the fight concludes. On the first level, Lafouille will only swing at you underhand, forcing you to jump over it with good timing. This was kind of a stupid choice though, as the second level simply makes you duck under the attacks, which doesn't require timing. You can just stay ducked down and then hit him. So what they should have done is flip these 2 sections to ease the player into this experience. Finally, on the third level, Lafouille will combine both moves as well as block low and high, which forces the player to consider more button inputs and commit to the right ones. To me, this whole sword fighting section is a poorly implemented idea. From a narrative perspective, in what world is innocent Penelope outdueling a man who spent his entire life as a pirate? And from a gameplay perspective, we're just kind of thrown into it without a proper warm-up, which doesn't feel good. Winning the fight bookends this chapter, and it's quickly revealed in the cutscene that Bentley and Penelope immediately became a couple after this interaction. The game does an okay job at building up to this. I mean, you get the point for a kid's game, but it does feel kind of rushed. Regardless, it is a nice little arc for Bentley, and will set up motivation for Sly in the finale, so it's fine for what it is. Also, I'm pretty sure Lafouille ends up dying as he's knocked into shark-infested waters. Seems kinda harsh for a non-final boss, but I guess he does deserve it. He ends up being a memorable villain though, and despite not being on screen a ton, he steals the show every time he pops up. With that, we're on to the final chapter of the game. This chapter has good and bad missions like any other, but luckily the forgettable ones are front-loaded to make room for a more powerful finale. Beginning our final chapter of the game flashes us back to the present moment where Sly is being crushed by Dr. M's beast after having his cane thrown into the ocean. It's a powerful scene where Sly reflects on the gang's adventures and how remorseful it felt to come so close to getting inside the Cooper Vault just to have failed. Sly admits to himself that despite his cool and easygoing nature, he's been a fool when it comes to romance, and he hasn't ever set himself up for a life outside of crime. He's been inspired by Penelope and Bentley to open up to Carmelita and see if they could make it work, but he now fears that he missed his chance. With Sly's future left up in the air, we get our final title card of the game. Welcome to Honor Among Thieves. One of the issues with making a game about assembling a team is that every team member has to be given a handful of missions to make their inclusion feel necessary, but if it's not handled well enough, it can make them all feel diluted if none of them are given enough time to shine. Nowhere is this more evident in Sly-tly than in its finale chapter, where most of it is about giving the new team members something to do, instead of maximizing the impact of the trio we've come to love. The chapter is also structured differently than anything we've seen so far. You're not allowed to select the order in which you play the missions, they just auto-start one after the other to tighten up the storytelling. It begins with Carmelita showing up, and we get our first real admission from the policewoman that she has an emotional attachment to Sly. We're tasked with using the shock pistol to save Sly, and it's incredibly easy to just stand your ground and spam the shock pistol to win the day. There's 3 phases to this job: shooting the beast from afar while it rains down guards on your position, then having to deal with enemies while continuing to fire on the big bad, and finally an up-close encounter with the creature itself to finish it off. This encounter is supposed to be more cinematic than anything, so I'm not terribly beat up about the easy gameplay. I think the real point of emphasis from this job comes in the encounter between Dr. M and Carmelita. She puts on a front, pretending that she's here to arrest all criminals, including Sly, but the Mad Monkey sees right through this and calls her out on it. He's able to deduce her true intentions, and it's some insight into his character. He's very intelligent. More importantly, he hints that he has a connection to Sly's father, and this information will be used later to set up a big reveal. I could take or leave the next 4 jobs, as all of them are about bringing back old playable characters and mechanics to give them one last mission to feature in. Sure, they are about completing some important tasks like recovering Sly's cane, which is of course needed to open the vault, but they just don't leave a lasting impact like the final 3 missions do. The first one features the Guru and sees the player navigating obstacles while mind-controlling sharks in order to get them to attack a magnetic platform. It's the pinnacle of challenge for the Guru's gameplay because you don't have any safe ground to walk on, so your precision must be on point to hop from shark to shark. This mission has 2 issues. First, after luring sharks to the platform, you must ride one back out to the next set of sharks. The problem is that often they will be facing the platform and you'll instantly crash into it as soon as you leap onto the shark, which knocks you off. If you don't react fast enough, you take damage that doesn't feel like your fault. Second, obstacles spawn in at some point and 2 of them are poorly implemented. The first of these is the spike balls that pop out of the water in groups of 4. They pop up one at a time, and there will be instances in which one spawns directly below you, making it impossible to dodge, which feels unfair. The other problem child is the electric pole that requires you to jump earlier than seems correct to avoid damage. Both of these things feel like the game working against you. Out of all the missions in this final chapter, this one is by far the worst. To be frank though, I'm not a big fan of the Dark Current either. This is Dimitri's second and final mission in the game, and it contains 2 parts. The first sees you dodging attacks while swimming through a tube of water. You must use your Power Stroke swim move to go up, down, left, and right before colliding with the sea creature's claws. You're thrown into this tube very quickly without being briefed on what exactly you must do to avoid damage. I mean, Penelope isn't even done explaining what the player is to do before the attacks begin, and it makes for a bad design choice, especially considering the player has only controlled Dimitri one time before this. On subsequent runs, it's fine, but I'm sure many new players took a lot of unnecessary damage during this section. The surging water spits you out into a boss fight with Dr. M and his giant fish squid. It's very easy to get disoriented in this fight because of the awkward movement controls I mentioned in Dimitri's previous outing. In that mission, it wasn't so bad because you had a lot of free space to maneuver in, but here, moving with the shape buttons throws you off, and the inverted controls for aiming your spear gun doesn't help either. The creature has a few main attacks, including launching discs that will shoot out a directional burst of lasers, a vacuum suck to pull you into its mouth, and electric tentacles that will zap you. Navigating these attacks while dealing out damage of your own feels stiff because, unlike in the previous Dimitri level, you don't have an open free space to move around in. I have to imagine that this is the worst boss fight in the game for many players, except maybe LaFouise if you want to count that. I've done this fight countless times throughout my life, and even I took a couple hits because of how janky the controls are. The worst part is, you don't even recover Sly's cane from this job. It's one of those annoying fights where you win mechanically, yet the game presents things as if you lost. It's just weird. Especially at the end, when Dr. M just kind of floats out in this awkward animation. God, that makes me laugh every single time I see it. Next up is our final RC vehicle mission, but I'd be remiss if I didn't include these lines of dialogue from Dimitri in the video.
That rude dude threw down heavyweight. I had him solid, but he ran, baby. Ran! And now I'm flat nowhere.
You were magnificent. Alone against a creature trapped in an undersea cave.
How about a kiss for Monsieur Magnificento? My lips are warm like bread from the oven.
Slow down. Remember rules 1 and 2. both of which told you to get over yourself.
Both before my magnificent. Yum, yum. Give me some.
There's a reason everyone loves the International Lounge Lizard. I mean, just look at him laying down the love language and then slinking off with that fat gut. It's perfect, really, truly perfect. Sly emerges after a short rest and is told the only way to get control of the skies is to fry the radio towers. The RC car is up for the job. The vehicle doesn't have its turret anymore after Bentley uninstalled it to put it onto his Grapple-Cam, and I've always liked that little piece of continuity. Instead, Penelope will have to smash up other drones using a new set of bumpers. This has always been one of my favorite RC sections in this game due to the fast speeds, the cool jumps, and the feeling of racing against other cars. It's nearly impossible to avoid damage given the narrowness of the track, but this gives a secondary reason to smash up vehicles, because siphoning their energy will not only allow you to advance, but it also regenerates your health. I think it's a smart way of raising the stakes in the player's mind. Taking damage raises the tension, but it never boils into frustration due to the frequent pickups. There's 3 tracks to race around, and you'll do the same thing on each of them before smashing one of the 3 radar towers. With that, the job's done. Our next job sees the return of the plane from Flight of Fancy, and it's by far the hardest of the 3 plane missions. You'll first have to destroy some turrets, then bat enemies that will require 2 hits to KO, and finally there will be a mesmerizing boss fight with Dr. M's flying whale. The flight mechanics remain the same as in the previous iteration of the plane levels, it's just that things are made harder to kill and will require more aggressive movement from the player. What I really wanted to discuss here is my breakdown for the total number of jobs each character gets. I made charts like these for both Sly 1 and Sly 2, but since those games were structured very differently from one another, it didn't make sense to compare them on their own. However, that isn't the case when looking at the charts for Sly 2 and Sly 3, given the similar setup for the games. So, here we have the job breakdown chart for Sly 2. A majority of the missions saw the player directly controlling Sly, while Murray and Bentley missions served as a nice change of pace as each character controlled differently enough. There was also a decent chunk of missions where the player spent time playing as multiple characters, although this stat was inflated by the operations that concluded each chapter. Essentially, the setup jobs to prepare for the heist were done by one of the 3 characters, and it culminated with each character contributing in some way to the final heist. This allowed the gameplay to reflect the title. This was a band of thieves working together. I commented that some of the best missions in the game involved playing as multiple characters, and it left me wanting more of those types of jobs. And now, I'm half tempted to say be careful what you wish for, as I unveil the job breakdown chart for Sly 3. As you can quickly see, jobs involving multiple characters skyrocketed in the 3rd game, and so I should be happy, right? Well, I'm really not, and here's why. The multiple characters category includes missions that involve at least 2 of all the playable characters, including the new additions and the hit or miss mechanics that come with them. As we've seen throughout this video, I'm not keen on all the new additions. They're fine on their own in some cases, but the problem is that they take away from our main cast of 3 that we've all come to know and love. Sly had 36 missions in the 2nd game all to himself, but only has 12 here. Bentley had 12 before, and that's been cut down to 3. Murray had 9, and that's also been cut down to 3. Now sure, you do sometimes play as these 3 in the multiple character missions, but not all the time. The other caveat is that Sly 3 simply has less missions than the previous game, 53 total here, down from 69 in the previous. Still, I can't help but feel like our cast of 3 got gypped here. The 4 new playable characters each get 2 jobs for themselves and snake away extra playtime in the multiple character missions. On top of that, Sly 3 felt the need to go all in on vehicle missions by pumping in planes and boats. They had Crash Warped Fever here and jettisoned in vehicles just to add another layer of gameplay. It's almost like the developers ran out of ideas for Sly, Murray, and Bentley, and instead of just giving us more of what we loved, they opted to throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what stuck. I think the most damning stat I can offer up would be this. In Sly 2, missions dedicated to playing as Sly, Murray, and or Bentley make up 100% of the missions, obviously. In Sly 3, missions dedicated to playing as Sly, Murray, and or Bentley makes up only 45% of the missions. The other 55% of missions involve a vehicle or playing as a new playable character. To me, that's insane, and it's my biggest piece of evidence for why this game isn't as fun to play as the second game. It diverges away from the core gameplay too often. At the end of this boss fight with Dr. M, the plot introduces a new point of contention. Dr. M is revealed to have worked with Sly's father, serving the Bentley role on his team. But a severe inferiority complex, paired up with the bravado of the Elder Cooper, left this man in shambles. It gives us a personal reason for why Dr. M is so hell-bent on getting into the Cooper vault. He feels like his work was the reason that Sly's father was so successful, yet his name is the one to remember, not Dr. M's. It's an interesting idea that I wish was explored more throughout this game, instead of reserving it for just the finale. It gives us a unique backdrop to compare our three characters against. Sly's dad, McSweeney, and Dr. M are mirror images to Sly, Murray, and Bentley. There's a lot to chew on here, but unfortunately, the game never does. Instead, the only interesting point raised out of it is Dr. M trying to convince Sly that he's as selfish as his father and that Bentley is the true leader of their gang. It's enough to draw an emotional reaction out of Sly, and he's forced to confront the notion that maybe he hasn't been the greatest friend. It forces him to briefly reflect on himself, but he does hone it back in quickly. He radios to Bentley and asks for him and Murray to join him to enter the illustrious Cooper Vault. Next, we arrive at the Ancestors Gauntlet, by far one of the greatest missions the series has ever given us. Not only does it provide an awesome challenge for the core platforming gameplay, but it also gives us insight into the Cooper clan. 3 games now have mentioned how Sly came from a long line of Master Thieves, but it was left unexplored until now. Up until this point, the most amount of insight we've gotten on the Ancestors was a quick look into their lives after saving sections of the Thievius Raccoonus in the first game. Now though, the roster of Ancestors has been expanded, and we get the chance to learn a little bit more about who they were, as well as their contributions to the Thievius Raccoonus. Any fan of the series ought to love this mission, just for how it's contextualized. I love getting more information about the Cooper line, and the sheer scale of the Gauntlet gives insight on just how influential the clan has been throughout history. We see Coopers from all eras, including the Egyptians, the Vikings, the Old West, and even in modern times with Sly's father. The only real hiccup would be that sometimes moves are required to progress that haven't been created yet by an ancestor. For example, you have to do a rail slide before reaching Tennessee Kid Cooper's section. Still, it's a small continuity error that's easy to overlook. That's doubly true when you consider that the gameplay of this section is pure slide platforming at its finest. It's called the Ancestors Gauntlet for a reason, as every member built a series of challenges that only a fellow Cooper could overcome. Some of the most challenging platforming bits of the series are found in this gauntlet, and will require a lot of super sneaky stealth moves to navigate. This game contains so many missions that get away from the series' core gameplay, and it's just great to see that they included a bit like this at the end of the game. It's a nice way of acknowledging the series' roots and how important platforming has been to the series. Like I said earlier, the finale of this game is really strong, and ends the original trilogy on an awesome sequence of events. It starts with the Ancestors Gauntlet, but it continues in Stand Your Ground, where Bentley and Murray must team up to stop Dr. M and his goons. As Sly traverses into the Gauntlet, Bentley and Murray are left behind to guard the entrance. After most likely overhearing the conversation between Sly and Dr. M earlier, Bentley questions their role in the gang and asks Murray if he feels like they're playing second fiddle to Sly. Murray rebuttals quickly, ensuring his friend that Sly would do the same for him if the roles were reversed. It's this quick pep talk that later gives Bentley the strength and courage to stand up to Dr. M, despite how similar the two appear at first glance. The exchanges in this scene always gives me goosebumps, because I can feel the emotions of the moment. It's a testament to how likable these characters became throughout the trilogy.
That's right, Bentley. I know the pain you suffer working under your inferior.
It's no secret I'm smarter than the other guys, but there's more to it than that.
Like what?
Like brotherhood.
Brotherhood? That's just what he wants you to think. It's a tool to keep you in line.
Now that's the thing that keeps us happy and alive. It's why I'm going to stop you.
And me too!
Fine, Koopa Gang. I tried.
Caveman attack!
From a gameplay perspective, this is the final time you'll be playing as Murray and Bentley. They finally push Murray's combat abilities to a point of challenge by throwing you up against a horde of foes. The series has only really done this once before, during Chapter 4 of the previous game. Here though, things are much better because enemies will attack more often and at closer ranges than in that previous mission. On top of that, they finally introduced a guard variant that can defend himself properly. The Crab-Crocodile hybrid has a pair of thick claws that he can use to defend himself against incoming punches. This means you can't just spam square to carry the day like you could at any other point while playing as Murray. You have to actually alternate between regular punches and grabbing enemies. It's such a small change, but it's the first time in the entire series where the game has really asked you to use a little bit of brain power while playing as Murray. After that, Dr. M emerges and Bentley must place ancient treasure pieces onto his back to zap him. In between runs though, guards will emerge and you have to use the Grapple-Cam to take them out quickly. If you're too slow, more will spawn. So it's a nice way of elevating the tension and the challenge for the player. Our last mission will naturally be a boss fight, but I think it's brilliant that the final times you play as Sly, Bentley, and Murray all represent their biggest contributions to the team. Sly has to platform, Murray has to fight, and Bentley must use his technology. We finally reach the end of the game as Sly comes face to face with Dr. M. This fight will determine who gets to collect the Cooper family inheritance. The wonderful orchestral music roars to life as the stage is set for this final encounter. The two men share very few words before the fight begins, and let me just say, this is by far the best final boss fight in the series, and honestly, it's probably the best fight across the entire series, period. Each of the other three Sly games had their final bosses come up flat. Clockwork and Clock-La were just too big to fight head-on, and as we'll see someday, La Paradox just gets a crappy QuickTime event. Dr. M though, he makes for a fantastic final boss. The main reason for this is because it remains a traditional yet challenging Sly boss fight while also incorporating platforming directly into the battle. Dr. M will sometimes use his helicopter hat to fly over a pit, and Sly will have to use the new laser walking move his father taught him to reach the madman before latching onto his mechanical legs. There are also times where Dr. M fires off water, electric, and fireballs that can't be destroyed except by traveling up the laser lines. It forces the player to jump and hit the circle button in order to win this fight, and to me, that's huge for a series built around that 2-button input. But again, the other important component here is that we get a traditional boss fight where you have to use your cane to beat the snot out of a bad dude. You're not just put in a position to spam square for victory. No, you must show some proficiency with the basic combat moves and beat an enemy with a lot of variation in his attacks. Dr. M is able to launch elemental balls, a full laser beam, mini laser projectiles, and can also charge or ground pound you with elemental variations on each as well. Unlike many others, he feels like a true threat who is capable of disposing of you in many ways using many different mechanics. He does go down eventually though, and he and Sly banter back and forth about the nature of the Cooper gang. Sly admits that not everyone in his ancestry was perfect, but that he can't be held accountable for that. All he can strive to be is the best version of himself. It's an awesome moment. What really sends it to the next level, though, is right as you're about to finish him off, Carmelita bursts into the room in grand fashion and announces that she's hauling the both of you off to jail. Her and Sly banter romantically, and a defeated Dr. M seeks to leave Sly equally as broken by firing a deadly shot at Carmelita. Sly, being the ultra-romantic that he is, jumps in front of the blast and is sent flying. You then take control of Carmelita, and you have to finish Dr. M off, which I think is a great touch. Forcing the player to finish things off here is much more powerful than just having her launch a shock blast at him during this cutscene. Dr. M is then defeated, and Carmelita checks on Sly. He appears to have amnesia, and Carmelita sees this as an opportunity for a fresh start. She tells Sly that he is her partner, and the two escape the crumbling sanctum together. In a smart move, Bentley narrates the game's final cutscene, leaving Sly's fate up in the air for a few moments. He details Dr. M's demise and how the gang escaped and eventually discovered that Sly didn't want to be found. He speaks about the difficulty the gang faced after splitting up and how, for the first time in their life, the gang members all had to learn how to exist on their own. Murray finished up his training with the Guru before becoming a pro racer, while Penelope and Bentley continued their relationship and created all sorts of technological wonders, including a time machine. But by far, the best moment of this ending cutscene comes after the credits roll. Bentley manages to track down Sly, and he sees his former partner and Carmelita embracing on a warm city night. Sly's amnesia has allowed for them to come together as a couple, but there's still one final surprise. Sly looks back, and he just winks, and it says it all. It's a beautiful ending to the original trilogy, and with that, we reach the end of the missions in Sly-tly, Honor Among Thieves. But this video isn't over yet. I want to share my thoughts on the game's characters and their arcs, as well as the overall theme of the story. Sly-tly, Honor Among Thieves is a game about legacy, crossroads, and growth. Many of the characters, both good and bad, are forced to make tough decisions in this game, ones that will greatly influence their futures. I'm talking about crossroads of their lives where they will opt to either evolve and grow or stay stagnant in the past. Our heroic characters are able to learn from their past mistakes and grow to become better people, while the villains choose to cling to the past and diminish their own legacies. Understanding when to let go is the core decision that many characters face throughout this story. Unlike with the previous game, Honor Among Thieves is a character-driven story, not a plot-driven one. Because of that, we could expect to see the characters undergo more dramatic changes than in previous titles, and that's exactly what we got. So let's take a look at how these character arcs emphasize that past versus future debate that I just mentioned. Sly is the titular character, but I want to save him for last. So let's start with our other two heroes, Bentley and Murray. Bentley is left in a wheelchair after the events of the previous game, and it's pretty easy to infer that this was probably a big hurdle for him to overcome. Throughout that second game, that character gained a lot of confidence and reached a point where he felt comfortable being out in the field and taking on strong villains. But it ended with tragedy as Klakla broke both his legs, paralyzing him from the waist down. We can infer through this conversation with Penelope that Bentley is somewhat bitter about being in a wheelchair, but has come to understand that it's out of his control. Still, he feels like it limits him in some capacity and makes him lesser, given his mini fixation on his limited abilities versus that of Sly's. He even questions his role on the team in this scene, and it's clear that he may be headed down the wrong path. His crossroads would be clinging to his past failures and resenting one of his close friends, or learning to accept his own limitations and striving to be the best person that he can. He opts for the latter and is able to build a strong relationship with Penelope because of his courage and unwillingness to flinch just because of his physical limitations. It's interesting that our intelligence-based character is the one who faces a physical challenge, while our strength-based character faces an internal struggle. The opening chapter of this game presents Murray as a man with a guilty conscience after he failed to save his friend from injury. His response was to leave the team completely, indicating that he thought distance would be enough to absolve his guilt. The past represented a painful memory for Murray, and abandoning it also meant giving up his enforcer mantra in favor of getting in touch with his spiritual side. His fixation with the Dreamtime is a temporary cure for his mind, but his real crossroads comes early in the title when he's forced to face his past. Bentley is in a similar position as he was when he became paralyzed, beaten and broken and laying on the ground. Murray is forced to choose to either defend his friend and reignite his life with the people he's closest with, or to stick to a forced perspective that he's put on himself. He opts to not tarnish his legacy by foregoing his past guilt and not letting it control him and dictate what he does. He realizes that his friend needs him in this moment and acts accordingly. It sets Murray back on the right path for the rest of the game. And by the game's end, he learns to balance his spirituality with his physical fitness in order to become a more well-rounded person. In terms of our support characters, we see this theme of past versus future continue. The Guru is kinda hard to analyze, and Dimitri's more of a humorous figure, but at least with the latter, he does go through the arc of being a bad guy to becoming more of a good guy who helps out our team. However, the rest of our support characters take this theme even further. The Panda King must face his split mindset and learn to balance his two selves, the fiery dictator who ruled over China and the new monk who seeks peace and humility. The most important thing to him is his daughter, and he accepts that his best chance of saving her is working with the man who brought about his ruin. It takes tremendous willpower to make a choice like this. Sly perhaps sums it up best when he talks to the Panda King at the beginning of Chapter 4. He tells him that they can't change their past, but that they can meet each other as the men they are today and see how they've changed. And then of course there's Penelope, who chooses to abandon her alter ego of the Black Baron and move on with her life. She chooses to be herself instead of clinging to a person that she's not. Carmelita's arc is a little forced, as we don't get too many signs of her impending change of heart, but by the game's end, she recognizes her own emotion for Sly and finds a way to take a shot at it. She's spent years hunting him down, but it's not until this moment that she realizes that her crusade was due to romance just as much as it was to her career. On the other hand, our villains represent characters who choose not to grow and change, and instead they clung to the past. Octavio was a famous opera singer who fell out of the limelight as music tastes changed. Instead of accepting a diminished audience and continuing with his passion for opera, he chose a life of crime and did everything in his power to try to force a comeback for the music he loved. He was willing to commit acts of terrorism just to cling to the idea that his fame and popularity could come back. General Sao is a man clinging to his ancestry, and the notion that his bloodline's power and wealth justifies any actions that he chooses. He leads a life of arrogance and sacrifices the freedom of others just to maintain his twisted vision. And then of course, there's the game's final boss, Dr. M, a man who has been consumed by the past, convinced that he was taken advantage of by Sly's father, and insists that he should be the one who inherits the Cooper fortune. He clings to the past so hard that he ends up going down with the ship, choosing not to escape to safety as the vault collapses, but instead opting to stay and die. It's these moments where characters are forced to choose stagnation or growth, to either cling to the past mistakes and lose everything because of it, or to push forward and take challenges head on in order to do what is right and to grow from it. And that brings us back to Sly. Here we have a character whose ancestry has heavily influenced the man that he has become, but also a man questioning his future. Sly is at the ultimate crossroads of his life, and it takes nearly being crushed to death for him to realize that he's been a coward towards Carmelita. Her safety and involvement in his life has always been mentioned throughout the games. They've had romantic encounters before, but it's never been allowed to go forward as both parties fell back into the cat and mouse routine. It's at this moment, when Dr. M threatens her life, that Sly makes his choice to abandon the past and move forward boldly by sacrificing himself and then feigning amnesia in order to start a new life with her. Imagine the guts it takes for a character to give up his entire livelihood and friendships for any reason, let alone one that comes with so many possibilities for failure. Yet, he still does it. The past is literally buried as the Cooper Vault collapses and Sly and Carmelita emerge as partners instead of foes. These ideas of legacy, growth, and learning to let go are the main themes of Honor Among Thieves, and almost every character is forced to grapple with them throughout the campaign. For a long time, I viewed this game's narrative as being too disjointed, but that's more due to the fact that the game is character-driven, not plot-driven. I think what holds it back for me personally, though, is that the game didn't go far enough with exploring the characters and instead kept it pretty baseline. This more basic approach better supports a plot-driven adventure like the one in Band of Thieves. Still, I can see why some fans would call this game's story more compelling than the previous, and I found a greater appreciation for it this time around. I mentioned earlier in this video that Sly-tly opted to move away from having clue bottles to collect in every level. Sucker Punch elected to have additional content come in the form of its 2-player mode and its additional challenges. I wanted to take a few minutes to briefly look at the game's local multiplayer component. That's right, for the first time in the series, 2 players could go against each other in a slew of minigames. I'm kinda stunned that development time went towards something like this, but given most of these minigames were already used in the campaign, I'm sure it didn't take too long to implement. Funny enough, I do actually have memories of playing some of these multiplayer modes with a friend while growing up, but I can't imagine they ever saw that much usage across the game's lifespan. There's 4 minigames to play. 1, Cops vs. Robbers, where Sly has to steal objects while Carmelita stops him. 2, the Hackathon, which is your basic hacker minigame, now with multiple players and wave after wave of enemies. 3, a biplane duel where you shoot and fly against an opponent. And 4, the Galleon duel where you fight using the pirate ships. It turns out it's kind of hard to find anyone who's willing to play a tacked-on, local multiplayer component with you from a game from 2005, so please enjoy me trying to play both sides myself at the same time as I talk over this footage. I don't have a whole lot to say about these modes, except for that they introduce some power-ups that changes up the gameplay a little bit from the main campaign. They are used most interestingly in Cops and Robbers, where Sly is given shields and maneuverability power-ups, while Carmelita gets high-caliber weaponry, the chance to temporarily stun Sly, and even the ability to teleport directly to him. Despite the insane power-ups for Carmelita, I remember this mode being pretty balanced back in the day, mostly because the loot you had to collect as Sly was normally close to a safe point to drop it off at. This and the Hackathon were the best 2-player modes if you ask me. And speaking of the Hackathon, it also gives some pretty awesome power-ups to use, and seeing how long you can last against an onslaught of enemies remains a fun game mode. I was never able to beat it though. In fact, I don't think I ever came close. The biplane duel and the ship battles are take it or leave it for me, as they were pretty standard, especially the pirate ship fight because it didn't have any power-ups. All in all, I don't really see why they included a 2-player mode in this game, and even if it didn't take long to cobble together, that time probably would have been better served working on the main campaign. I can't say the same about the extra challenges though, because they do a fine job of injecting difficulty into a series that's lacked it. Basically, challenges will ask the player to repeat tasks that they did in the original campaign, but with additional stipulations such as having halved health, taking out additional enemies before completing your goal, and beating the clock to reach certain areas. Pretty much all the new challenges revolve around one of these modifiers, except for the treasure hunts that can be done in each level. In order to reach 100% completion for the game, you'll have to complete all of these challenges, and some of them will take a lot of effort and attention to succeed in. I'm glad they included these, and incentivized people to complete them by unlocking additional bonus movies at certain percentage markers. These movies included a 2-part short showing the Cooper gang in action as they pull off a heist to steal a candy bar, as well as a short showing the evolution of Sly Cooper, and of course, the Dimitri music video for 100% completion. While I do believe the time sunk into creating a 2-player mode should have went into the original campaign, I can't say the same for the challenge mode because it does introduce some much needed optional difficulty for the series. Sly-tly Honor Among Thieves has one overarching problem: a lack of cohesion. The core of the series' gameplay was diluted down with the addition of new playable characters who all control differently, as well as the introduction of way too many new vehicle sections. The game is also 2 chapters shorter than the previous, meaning that a lot of these new ideas don't get enough time to shine, and instead just take away from the platforming and action gameplay that the series was founded on. Between the new characters, the new tools, the new vehicles, and the other gimmicks like a 3D mode, it's clear that the developers really struggled to push the series forward, and instead opted to throw in a bunch of random ideas, hoping that a few of them would be received positively. Unfortunately, it led to a juggling act where every form of gameplay is underutilized and underdeveloped, while also being fairly different from one another. The story also lacks the feeling of cohesion that the previous game mastered, but this issue isn't nearly as bad as the gameplay debacle. While the gameplay struggles to establish itself with confidence by waffling in a bunch of different modes of play, the story is less cohesive simply because the overarching events don't necessarily connect. There's nothing binding the villains of this game together in the same way that the Fiendish Five and the Claw Gang were. Instead, the story focuses on the characters and exploring how they either succeeded or failed in growing to be new people and letting go of the past. The plot-driven nature of Band of Thieves made things easy to follow, but character-driven stories are a lot more divisive and take more critical thinking to process, and I think that's the big reason for why this game's story isn't viewed as favorably as the previous, but I still think it's pretty good when viewed in a different light. Still, there's no denying that this game's plot isn't as cohesive as the previous. And finally, the production value and presentation remains largely unchanged from the previous outing, with a few steps forward and a few steps backwards in various regards. I realize that this conclusion is sounding overly negative, but make no mistake, Sly-tly Honor Among Thieves is still a fantastic experience. The issue for me is that the second game really captured the magic and left very little room for improvement in this third game. It's my belief that the developers felt this pressure too, and instead opted to try a bunch of different things instead of just giving us the same story and gameplay over again. It was an admirable effort, but it still came up short. However, the developers really reined things back in during the finale of this game, in particular, the final 3 missions. It's in those 3 jobs where the core gameplay is re-established and crescendos with a brilliant boss encounter that takes advantage of combat and platforming in smart ways. Sucker Punch knew that going into this game, it was going to be their final outing with Sly, and they decided to send the characters off right. If Band of Thieves was about forming a brotherhood, Honor Among Thieves is about recognizing the end of an era, much like the developers did while making this title, and it respects its characters greatly by sending them off into the future with new and happy lives after overcoming a lot of physical and mental challenges. While Sly-tly will never be my favorite entry in the series, this playthrough has given me a newfound respect for Sly's final outing with Sucker Punch. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of another massive commentary on the Sly Cooper series. Once again, this video took a long time to make, and if you enjoyed it, I really would love if you could click that subscribe button, leave a like, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I have a bunch of other great content on the channel for you as well to check out, including lengthy reviews, analysis of various components of games, and a series called Psychology of Gaming, where I take a look at how psychological principles are worked into games and how games can affect us psychologically. I know the biggest question that will spawn from this video is, of course, will I be looking at Sly 4 Thieves in Time? The answer to that question is a resounding yes. However, I've only played through that game 2 or 3 times compared to a few dozens for the original trilogy. And because of this, I'm going to do 2 playthroughs of the game just to refamiliarize myself with it. That means that it may take a little bit longer to make that video, but you can still expect it sometime in 2021. Anyway, again, if you made it through the whole video, thank you so much for watching. Seriously, thank you. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp. And as always, guys, have a nice day and take care.